it sets the board in the right context because we're focusing on our patients and our staff and not just a pile of paperwork. So we're going to start with, when I get the right list in front of me, I've got too many bits of paper at the moment. We're going to start actually with my own group. But what I didn't do was agree with whether Arlene or James would do the feedback. We visited the emergency department. We had an absolutely great visit. James, is it going to be you or Arlene?
Well, I'll start.
And then Arlene can pick up anything she thinks you missed. Yeah, great.
We went into what, by recent standards, is a relatively calm ED this morning. Although we were mindful of the fact that it still felt very busy, but this is probably one of the calmest days they've had for about a month. We noted, I think, the quality of the environment by and large, but actually a very pleasant environment being created. I think I personally noted a lot of sort of caring interactions between staff and patients as well. People, getting the care rounds, getting the offers of drinks and food when they've been there for some time. We talked about the fact that the impact that same-day emergency care in our home had on the flow through the department. So actually, although there were some people who were waiting to be seen and assessed, actually some of those people were potentially able to go home with the right support rather than being admitted into the hospital, and how in the context of the current pressures that is contributing to the flow as well. We did have quite a long conversation about the interface between, particularly in majors, between our staff and the ambulance trust staff as well, and about when the ED department's under pressure and the ambulance trust is under pressure, and about how we make sure that we've got really effective policies and procedures to make sure that we're managing handover really well. So, I mean, I was aware that that was an issue anyway, so I was really keen to get a bit of direct feedback from the staff around that. And I think those were some of the key things that came out for me. But Arlene, I'm sure you want to add more as well.
No, I think it's similar. Today, it's almost as if we said, the exec are coming round, stay away from ED, but because it was really low numbers everywhere that we went, which meant that staff had the time to speak to us, which was very good. All staff, as usual, were very engaging and really passionate. You can tell the passion that they have for what they do. We managed to see most of ED, which is unusual, because sometimes you go and you only get to one area. And we went to Peds ED as well, and I think we were able there to talk about the challenges that they've had recently, and the benefit that they feel that they will have from the increased establishment that we have agreed with the one extra nurse on a shift. And in fact, the nurse in charge there said that would probably make a difference between her staying or leaving, because she just couldn't imagine a winter with the staffing levels that we've had. So all together a really positive visit.
I'll just add that I spoke to a couple of patients, and both were very complimentary about the care they've received. One was a paediatric patient and with an obviously unwell baby, but the mum did feel very well supported. And I also spoke to a lady who was waiting to be transferred to St Helier, and she again had exemplary care, but she said it very kindly. It was not in any way a complaint, but she's been held in an area that's not designed for holding people overnight, and she's in a lot of pain, and although people were doing their best with pain control, just the noise and environment that she was in was obviously adding to her distress, which, you completely understand. And as I say, she was utterly grateful for all the help she was getting. But I couldn't but agree with her, and I think we ought to acknowledge and absolutely praise our staff, who are emergency department staff, but they're ending up nursing people over a period of time that's not what they signed up for. And it's because the hospital, like all hospitals, is clogged up, and we can't move people through in the way that we would want to, and ideally we need to. So for me, that was really very striking. It was a very graphic example of what we read about in the papers and what we know from our own experience with our hospitals, that because people can't be discharged at the other end, people still keep coming through the door because they need us. So, but I think in those difficult circumstances, we're doing a fantastic job, and that is certainly what our patients thought. So that's all I wanted to add. So to my thanks to both James and Arlene. So the next visit on my list is Richard and Anne. It says here went to Buckley, but I'm just checking they did. And Richard, who's feeding back? Richard. Sorry, Anne, I could see Richard more easily than I could see you at the time. Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start and might want to add something. So yes, so we went to Buckley, which is 2 floors up. And had an excellent visit, and inspiring in some ways, actually. So Buckley is a big ward. It's 33 beds, so it's about the same size as AMU.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine, it's fine.
It's my IT's not working, Richard, so I'm
okay.
panicking about how I'm going to chair the meeting. Sorry.
No
My
worries.
apologies.
No, that's all. No, the chair definitely shouldn't apologise to the medical director.
Well, no, she should when she's not concentrating.
So it's a 33-bedded ward. It's got a mixture of care of the elderly patients and gastroenterology. It's had its fair share of challenges. And I think it's probably fair to say that it's been an area of concern and attention at times because of some of those challenges. And they've been challenges, I think, around staff retention, continuity of leadership, a backlog of incidents such as patient falls that haven't been fully investigated and closed. So various things like that. And there is a ward manager, a matron, I should say, called Amberley, who showed us around, who has only been there for, I think, a couple of months, she said, who is really getting to grips with that. And when I said it was inspiring, I think we had a sense of being inspired by the sense of leadership. People who come into environments that have issues and have a sense of optimism and care about the staff and show how good teamwork can start to turn things around. So I had a real sense that was happening. Amberley was able to show us data on quality. She knew how to find the data and look at the quality dashboards. She's getting a board in to be able to display the data so all the staff can see it. She told us, and we met Dr. Radnari as well, who's also quite new, who's one of the consultant geriatricians, and they were talking about the multidisciplinary team meetings that they've set up, which are new in terms of their scale and scope, I think. We asked Amberley about fire marshals, and she said, I am the fire marshal for this shift, and I know every single shift has a fire marshal, and I know who they are, and I could show you if you wanted. And I thought that was really impressive, actually. And she said she's decluttered the environment as a fire marshal. Personally, I think we should ask about that on all our visits. I think it's worth doing that. I suppose, and we heard a bit about some of the challenges with patients. You can imagine that cognitive impairment is a common problem. A lot of people lack mental capacity, and so we're holding all the responsibility for them. And they have patients who have bariatric conditions who have added layers of complexity. I think the thing I came away with that was less comfortable hearing, I think, was talking to some of the staff who do the catering there, who are actually some of the people who've been there for the longest, who know the ward really well, who are just pointing out that the deal isn't the same, or it doesn't feel the same for catering staff and some staff as it does for some of the NHS staff who are on Agenda for Change. And they talked about that and talked about their perception of the arrangements around sickness and fairness. And it was less about the details of that and more about the sense that they didn't feel that they were part of the same family as everybody else and didn't feel as valued as everybody else. And one of them actually said to me, Richard, we keep the patients going the same as the doctors do. We feed them. Patients need to be fed. We're an integral part of the team. But he said there feels like a bit of disconnect. And I could feel that, and I thought that was a shame. But you know, we can't fix everything all at once. But it was the one slightly sad note in an otherwise, I think, very inspiring visit.
Thank you, Richard. Anne, anything to add?
I mean, I absolutely agree with what Richard said. It felt to me like they'd recruited some really good people, you know, the ward manager, the new consultant, and they really need our support to turn the ward around. You know, the facilities were just not right. There was nowhere for staff sensibly to kind of take a break. You know, the staff room was awful. And you kind of think they're in a bit of a vicious loop, that actually if they can't make the staff feel valued, they don't stay. So they have a high number of temporary staff, which impacts on patient care. And I just feel that they just need a bit of support to get them out of that loop, because I think they were certainly, the new people that were providing the leadership there, were determined to try and improve it. But I think we might need to help them to get there.
Thanks to both Richard and Anne. I actually did a visit there a couple of weeks ago, and I think the new leadership there is fantastic. But I think, Anne, your points are really well made about making sure we give the right support, and yours as well, Richard, about the broader family. You wanted to come in, James?
I just wanted to say, I mean, it's really helpful to hear the feedback, and actually really positive. I think that we know that Buckley Ward is an area that, because of the multiple specialties, because it's quite a large ward in quite a small hospital, and therefore takes quite a diverse group of patients, has actually in the past really struggled for that sense of, a really clear sense of identity. It's something where we've worked really closely with our medicine division to make sure that we've got that leadership, got that sense of coherence around the MDT as well. So, you know, these things take a while to turn around, but actually it is helpful to hear. But helpful to hear that it's a work in progress, because I think that's entirely where we would expect it to be.
Thank you very much, James. So the next on my list is Stephen and Martin going to maternity. Is that right?
It is. I don't know whether Martin wants to lead or whether. So the plan changed slightly. So we ended up going to maternity and also to Casey Ward with James as well. So we combined a couple of
right,
visits.
okay, right.
So
well, I'll give you all the chance. Now I'm no longer distracted by my IT.
So I'm happy to offer a few comments and others come in if that sounds okay. So we first went to maternity. We're quite impressed with how sort of clean, bright, spacious, etc. it was, and how calm it was. They talked us through some of the sort of maintenance work that they'd done sort of on an ad hoc basis to sort of improve the environment, which is interesting. I think they talked about the peaks and troughs that the service went through, and they referred to how earlier in the week it had been quite intense, whereas now it was in a comparative sort of trough. And we talked quite extensively to the acting director of midwifery, which was very interesting, and the interviews for the substantive post are happening today, I believe. I think that one of the interesting things we talked to them about was their reflections and their work in terms of the action plan on Ockenden, but also reflecting in terms of the East Kent report of a couple of weeks ago, and sort of reflecting on some of the messages coming out of that in terms of Kirkup's reflection that there are many action plans, and actually there's a risk of sort of action plan overload, and the importance of actually the cultural change that needs to happen across maternity services in the country as a whole. Bit of talk about the national challenges around maternity recruitment, etc. Bit of the same theme coming up as Richard mentioned in relation to some of the housekeeping staff. So we spoke to one of the cleaners there who had been with the trust for about 18 months, who hadn't previously worked when it was contracted out. But we heard from the team about how the differential sort of terms and conditions was having an impact in terms of the degree to which they felt part of the family. And there was quite a lot of feeling that we needed to move on that, because it did have a sort of material impact in terms of how valued they felt as part of the wider team. We then went to Casey Ward, where probably had quite a different experience. So some more challenges around the estate, specifically around bathrooms. We took a look in a couple of bathrooms where the matron was very clear that they weren't of a standard that you would want to wash your own family, let alone patients, particularly patients with vulnerable health conditions, etc. Pointed out the ligature risks that existed in a number of areas there as well. There has been sort of bids in terms of the capital programme to address some of that, and that's working its way through. We talked as well about some of their frustrations around their engagement with the culture change programme, and some of the messages that were coming up through the culture champions, which I think we'll pick up separately. So we'd want to follow that up. And I think the other part was while the matron referred to how she had made sure that the unit was fully staffed, just the impact that the staff being off could have in terms of the number of beds available. So, earlier in the week or the weekend, having gone from 12 beds down to 8, and the impact that could have. I don't know, James, Martin, whether there's anything else you'd want to add.
Martin?
Yeah, just to add a few things. So in terms of maternity, I think of all the visits that I've done since, the last 4 years, that's probably the most positive and impressive. Impressive in the sense of the whole ambience, but specifically the leadership, and to build on what Stephen was saying, that they were incredibly positive about facilities, and it would be good to get that sort of fed back to them, every aspect of facilities. And they, for instance, showed us the menu, and just extraordinary. A few little things that could be a bit better for patients with diabetes, but really, really high quality. For what it's worth, I just registered that they showed us a very nice room, which apparently we sell for £229 a night, which I didn't know. But in lots of private hospitals, you get a worse room for £500 a night. So if that is in our gift, we might want to think about pricing. And then the other thing on the Casey ward that struck me was that not only was, so I don't want to repeat it, but there were lots of problems with, the other problems with the bathrooms is that they get the highest rating possible on ligature risk because they are so old. And that speaks for itself as a point. And a lot of the surfaces, like the desks and so on, fail infection control because it's an old, worn-off surface. So from a nursing point of view, there's nothing they can do about it. But what stuck in my mind was that they are trying to get the bathrooms done, but per bathroom it's £30,000. Now, it didn't surprise me in any organisation that it costs a bit more than it would at home, but 10 times? You get a nice bathroom for £3,000. So I'm not surprised if it's 2 or 3 times, but why it would cost us £30,000 to refit a bathroom was a little beyond me. Thank you.
Okay, Martin, we might have to have a discussion about bathrooms. I clearly got done when I had my latest one put in. Anyway, for another time and place. James, anything you wanted to add?
Not much. I agree with Martin. It was really uplifting walking around the maternity department. The sense of pride in the team, the sense of calmness. Yeah, but to be fair, it was quiet there. But the sense that they were a team that were on it. They were definitely aware of the challenges in terms of the increasing national concern about maternity services, and they'd given a lot of thought to their culture, their sense of openness, and how they would respond to potential action plans that will inevitably be coming our way with regard to the latest reviews from East Kent. But then it was and what we heard about from, so we spoke to one of the housekeepers, Anna, who'd been working at the Trust for 15 months, and she definitely felt part of the team, and she definitely felt a sense of pride of being part of that team. And so we went off that unit feeling very uplifted. And I thought it would be helpful to contrast with Casey, where we know there have been some challenges with morale among the nursing team, and that shone through. They've got some real concerns. They're really very keen to get some clarity about the future direction of the organisation and whether we will be, when we will be building the new hospital so that they can look forward to new developments for a much better environment for our children and young people to go there. On a positive note, I think they've taken a lot of proactive steps with recruitment. We know it's been challenging with recruitment. And on another positive note, I've been very aware about the challenges they've had looking after young people with mental health disorders. Today there were 9 patients on the ward, none of whom were requiring mental health input. And the nurse in charge mentioned that she felt that there'd been a shift over the past 3 or 4 months in a positive direction with the pressures about mental health, but she was acutely aware that it'd been ongoing pressure.
Can I just add something very, very quickly? On the recruitment point, what was particularly interesting was that we know there's a national shortage of midwives, and we often hear that, you know, we can't recruit people because there's a shortage. It would be well worth HR doing a deep dive in what they're doing and why they've been so successful in recruiting and retaining midwives, because they had some very specific initiatives that clearly are working.
I think we know some of the answers to that, Martin. The staffing ratios are really good at Epsom St Helier, much better than in other parts of the country. And so that makes a difference, I think.
Yeah, but for example, they had, and yeah, you could argue it both ways, they had two nurses who are dedicated to recruitment. You know, that kind of specialist input and the way that they created such a positive working environment, obviously better resourcing helps. It's a bit of a vicious circle, but nevertheless, it's unusual in my experience in a shortage area to find that they can attract and retain very easily.
Thank you very much. Right, we better move on because we're running a bit short of time now. Next on my list is Paul and Thurza and Chris went to Alex Ward. Is that right?
Correct, yes. Thank you. I'll start off and then Thurza will...
I may not be as generous with everybody because
Right.
we're running
Okay.
short of time.
Okay.
No, I meant your compatriots in this regard, Chris. You're fine.
The first thing to say about Alex Ward is it's a frailty ward, specifically designed for patients with frailty, which is a multiple problem with usually mental health issues, often around dementia, and also physical issues. It's part of the Surrey Downs Health and Care Complex, as opposed, which comes under this board, of course, but that message was portrayed to me, and I think to all 3 of us, very strongly, that they felt that they were part of a patient's pathway through I guess the care of their frailty, most of which would take place in the community, most of which was best taken place in the community, and a hospital stay should be as short as reasonably possible for those patients to get them back home again. And that shone through with all our visit, really. As a ward, it was clean, it was bright, the resus trolley had been checked, there was no unnecessary cluttering of surfaces and so on. It was calm, but in a busy way, and there are so many. And in fact, there are sort of so many things to talk about with this ward that I can't go into all of them, I suppose. But it was very dynamic. We talked with the ward clinical matron and with one of the consultants, and also a number of the multidisciplinary team therapists. I talked with a patient. There was obviously an enthusiasm with all the staff for what they were doing and the way they were providing their care and making it very patient-centred. There are examples about how they engage the patients in group therapy every day, if at all possible, to give them something to do, an activity, rather than just lying in bed and staring at the ceiling or sitting in a chair. There was one therapist who was leaving but going to Australia as part of her own career development, so that was sorry, I'm getting stuck now. I'm trying to be quick about it, but
Sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to put pressure on you.
so I think those are the key points I wanted to make. It was a very impressive visit, and with a team that's well led, knows what they're doing, knows what they're trying to do. They commented about their staffing. They are reliant to a certain extent on bank staff, but that, though not ideal, works reasonably well for them. Two sort of negatives came out. One of them, they couldn't get their laptop to work, so that was delaying their medicines round. The other thing was that they raised a concern. They're very happy with their environment at the present time. They are concerned because this is a temporary ward for them, and they will be moving back to their old ward in, I think, 18 months or so. And they're concerned as to whether that ward will be as fit for purpose as their current ward. So I would encourage that debate to go on with it, particularly in terms of their ability to keep an eye on patients. So for one of the things we saw, which was very impressive, was each of the 4-bedded or 6-bedded bays rather had a table in it where members of staff would go and work on that table, so that patients could see that there was a member of staff available. And also in terms of team working, they work as a team. So if a patient needs help feeding, they may not be fed by a nurse, they may be fed by a doctor or one of the therapists. It's everybody's job. It's not somebody else's job. And that was a fantastic thing, really. So I shall cease there. I probably missed some things out, but Thursday or Paul, I'm sure, will add those.
Well, I'm not going to give them much of a chance, actually, mainly because of time. So, Thursday, any essentials? Paul, any essentials?
No, I just thought it was one of the most impressive wards I've been to in a very, very long time. And if I may, just a real quick story. It really resonated with me because my brother has Parkinson's, and he fell over earlier on this year. He was in hospital for 14 weeks. And he went from being in sheltered accommodation to having 24/7 care. And I have to say, when I went in there, I thought, if he'd have been here, that wouldn't have happened. It really genuinely was impressive.
You're so right, Paul. And I think the story we had at the annual meeting illustrated that, didn't it? So clearly. It's always a most uplifting place to go. I'm so sorry to hurry you up, but I've still got 2 more to report back. So next on my list is Andrew, who went with Parveen to Britain, and I ought to explain that because Parveen chairs the Quality Committee in Common, she's very keen that she has a good grasp of ESTH, so she volunteers to come, and Andrew each time has ended up going around with her. So Andrew, what did you see in Britain?
No, again, well, Britain, it's a stroke ward in the block over there, which I think is L block. I'm showing my sense of geography there. It's been recently refurbished and they've moved in, so it's a quite a high standard, but I'll come back to that at the end. But on the whole, staff are very positive. As the messages we've heard previously, really engaging team. The ward manager was really engaged, took us round. All the team were very friendly. Everybody was, obviously working very well together. Everybody was busy. The ward was clean and tidy. All the things you would expect to be in place were in place in that sense. So I'm Parveen checked, if I can say that. So we spoke to a couple of patients, and again they were very positive about the care they'd received and about the environment. No criticisms at all about anything. Well, there was one criticism, but I think it's just getting in on the act at the moment. So there was a complaint about NHS pay. Which I said I would report through.
Yeah.
But he said that staff deserved more pay. So I said I would feed that forward, even though it's slightly beyond our remit. But so on the whole, exceedingly positive. The negatives that we were asked to feed forward. Again, while around the physical environment, so while the ward is very newly refurbished, there are, let's call it, teething problems in terms of how it practically works. So the layout of some of the bays where the doors are means you can't see in walking into the bay. there is a lack of storage, so they've cannibalised 2 of the toilets to use those for storing equipment. You know, and some minor things like, you know, automatic door close, or things to hold doors open permanently, you know, so particularly on the bays and various other things. So so things like that, while not fundamental, they make it irritating, and it's stuff that the longer they are on the ward, the harder those things become, I think, in the sense of that. So, and I think there was some concerns when the other stroke ward moves in next door, there'll be some shared facilities like staff rooms and some of the storage, which will then add further pressure to some of those issues. And the other estate-related issue that came up, which we spoke to a couple of people as we were doing, was the link bridge, and in terms of the slope. And some of the porters stopped us to sort of comment on that while we were standing talking about it, so they came and joined in and expressed their concerns about the mine side. It's not major, but it's just if someone were to lose control. And so those, but on the whole, exceedingly positive from the ward.
Thank you, Andrew, and it illustrates why we need our new hospital, really.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course you can, as long as you're very quick.
Very quick. I suppose it's just how much input do our staff have into designing wards? And I know sometimes when you're refurbing somewhere, it isn't as much, but do they really get involved in it and they get listened to?
So, I mean, it's quite an interesting question. I would say that our sense is that there is a lot of involvement, and there has been sign-off processes around new ward environments. I think that one of the things that we're looking at as part of our review of our site governance processes is to try and improve the transparency and the structure around that. I think there's a couple of things that come up. I think the first is that these processes take place over quite a long period of time, and sometimes we don't have consistent people involved. So the conversation with one group of staff, there might be a slightly different view when you then get quite, and we have had a couple of issues where we've come quite close to the opening of a new ward environment, and somebody's looked at it and is concerned about something, and we've had to go back and make some changes or make some adaptations, or perhaps change the cohort of patients going in there. So I think having that clarity, and also having that clarity about what's achievable within those environments as well, because I think that, you know, to be fair with Britain, I think if we want the bed spaces in the physical amount of space, there are probably some trade-offs. But the question is, are we being really clear and transparent and having some real structure around those trade-offs? So what I've asked Trevor to do as part of setting up our new site governance structure, Trevor's our estates director, is to make sure that we have an estates and facilities oversight group that's got ops and nursing input in particular, so that when we are doing a refit of an area, we have really clear and transparent joint senior ownership of how we're managing the constraints and parameters of that space, because I think there is involvement, but I don't think we're always as clear about those processes, and I don't think we always kind of hold the thread of how we're doing that as well as we could do.
Thanks, James, and thank you, Jacqueline, for asking the question. It was absolutely the right question. I've been on a lot of these wards and seen these things when they've been newly refurbished, and I've said to everybody, but we've just refurbished it. Could we not have got it right? I think it is partly that we're working within an existing estate that's got lots of problems, and that we are making trade-offs, as you say. Right, we're running a bit late now, which, as you all know, always makes me slightly anxious. We're on the last group, which is Jacqueline and Derek, who went to pharmacy. So,
yes, we went to 2 places, Chair. The Haematology Day Unit and the pharmacy.
Oh, right.
The positives from the Haematology Day Unit, which we visited before the patients had really started coming in, were the team spirit, I think, a very positive attitude, clearly good relationships within the team members that were there, and a nice, clean, tidy environment. It helped with the fact there were no patients. But, patients always make things untidy. But without the patients, it was very nice and clean and tidy, and
empty.
And plenty of space for evacuations. That was good. The negative that came up was a sensation of pressure of work, and the team feel that they've taken on a lot of workload. They're a haematology team, they're split with St Helier, and they feel they've taken on a lot of work from medicine, and I think particularly the antibody infusions, things like Crohn's disease, rheumatology, and now using a lot of infusions, and that work is coming to them. And there was just a slight sense that it wasn't really owned. You know, we're doing this as a favour for someone else in someone else's department, and I think maybe in terms of sort of ownership, that was quite significant. then went down to pharmacy, which is in the basement, and the key issue that came up there was staffing and the impact mainly of 7-day working and the fact that they didn't really have a big enough core team to accommodate 7-day working. They'd stretched it, meant they were then short during the week. There's a lot of issues around teamwork and leadership, which I think are being addressed elsewhere. But the positive that came out from them, I think, was the sense that they're making a real contribution to patient care. And they gave the example of a 4-year-old child on terminal care and how they've gone the extra mile to make sure that that child was well cared for. And I think there's a great sense of ownership and a service well provided and a patient well cared for. And I think that's one of the things that made them buzz. That and the sense of their ownership of the core team they belong to. So they supported one another very closely. I think there was a sense of separation from higher management structures, but very much a key focus on their own supporting one another and supporting the patients they served.
Excellent. Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Jacqueline?
Just a few bits. I think the bit about the extra was a St Helier issue, wasn't it, more than an Epsom issue? Somebody here might know better than me. With all the extra infusions that they're doing, I thought that was a St Helier issue. But either way, I think some of it is that they've collected, rightly probably, patients in one area to actually do infusions rather than dotted them around. That's the impression I got. But it hadn't been protocolised. Everyone did their own thing. There hadn't been an opportunity to do some QI to actually standardise that, which I think would probably help because we need more staff, and we talked about, well, there probably isn't any coming. How are we going to do this differently? They agreed that maybe if we could protocolise it, that consultants didn't all do what they fancied rather than actually work to a protocol, that would help them a lot. So I think that was the first thing that we talked about. The second thing that we talked between them and pharmacy actually was an OPAT service, which is an outpatient antibiotic team service. And I sort of got the impression, Derek, that we sort of did it, but we sort of didn't. And it wasn't really a protocolised, clear service that actually was done in the community by a team that did it. It sort of was, we sometimes do it, get the district nurse to sort of bob along, but it wasn't in a way, is that you're nodding to that. That feels like a real opportunity around how for both Epsom and St Helier we can actually move more patients in the community for their antibiotic therapy and probably other therapies as well, actually. It's not just about antibiotics. So I think that was and we have that at George's, it's a Baxter service that we have at George's, so that's something that we could think about. I think that was it. There were the two things I wanted to add.
And I think with OPAT, the importance of lines of clinical responsibility.
Absolutely.
And that was one of the issues with the infusions, was that each different department's patient had a different line of clinical responsibility. And I think if we do go ahead with an OPAT service, it's very clear that we need a senior clinician or clinical team who own it, and just got an impression that that might not happen.
Okay, so I think we haven't got time to get any further involved in that, but clearly some things to be followed up. And I'm sure that exec colleagues have listened really carefully to that. So thank you so much, everybody. Some really rich report back.
Just a very brief comment. I promise it will be short. It's just the observation, really, the fact that universally from each of the visits, the feedback has been positive, staff morale high, good teamwork. And it's just trying to then correlate that with the feedback you get at the kind of trust level, people's surveys and the concerns we have about the culture, if you like, the culture work. So is it this disconnect and how we break the disconnect between that local, and it's not unique to here, you find it most organisations, between positive local engagement and commitment, and yet this kind of feeling at a kind of broader level that things aren't quite right. And that's the challenge, it seems to me. Thank you.
I think it's an organisational feature of many institutions. It is quite striking in health to me, Peter, having come from a different sector altogether. James, this really is the last word. We need to move on to the formal bit of the meeting.
So our staff are extraordinarily committed and extraordinarily driven to do the very best for their patients, and will always want to speak positively. I think wherever they can, when we are in that environment of being out and about and visiting, and will always want to talk positively about the work that they do. I think it's incredibly important that we have a variety of channels to hear from staff and from patients. And I think the thing about the staff surveys and about some of the work that we're doing on culture through our CLP programme is they give people an opportunity in a different forum and perhaps with a higher degree of psychological safety than they might have talking to a director who's on a visit, to give some slightly different messages. And I think we need to hear all of those messages. And I think it's our job, I see it as my job as a director to form a balanced view of what I'm hearing, and to take the positives, but also be very realistic about some of the really significant challenges that I think affect people right the way through the NHS.
I think it's a really important debate, but not one, sadly, that we can have right now. There will be other opportunities, undoubtedly, both in board but outside board. It's a really important matter. So I'm sorry, I'm going to move us on now. Thank you, everybody. Clearly, everybody loves getting out into the hospital, seeing all the things they do, talking to staff, listening to everything they have to say, and it's great that we're able to do it. So into the formal part of the meeting, we have no apologies for absence. Declarations of interest, is there anything new? Otherwise, it's all the ones. Derek? Oh, I'm so sorry. Actually, I've got two apologies. Aruna and Phil. So thank you for being my conscience, Derek. Aruna and Phil have both apologised. Anne, did you want to say something?
No, I'm having to fly blind because I've got no access to admin control, so I'm waiting for you to get to the minutes.
Would you like to?
With my amendment.
Do you want my other machine?
I've been locked out of admin control.
Oh, well, so that was what was causing my panic at the beginning of the meeting when I was.
Turn your Wi-Fi off.
Yes, if you turn your Wi-Fi off, it works. But anyway, I'll just get going on the meeting and I'll give you my other machine.
No, it's not the machine, it's the admin controls.
Yeah, but it's machine dependent is the point. I'll explain. Says she, so she knows more about these things. Anyway, any new declarations of interest?
I'm not sure if I need to or not.
Okay, if in doubt, Martin.
Okay, so I'm doing some consultancy work for an NHS trust in Essex.
Thank you. So can we agree the minutes of the previous board meeting in September?
That's what I wanted to say. Was it said from memory that I went to paediatrics, whereas I actually went to renal?
Right, we will correct that, Anne. I'm busy trying to get you on admin control at the moment. I'm trying to multitask very badly.
Stop sending me a PDF.
So that takes us on to the action log, and actually I will have to stop trying to multitask because I do need to concentrate on the action log. So the first point is the return to work policy. Is this yet fully resolved?
It's so this is about people being asked to use their annual leave. What we've done is we've talked to staff side. Our practice has changed. What we haven't yet done is updated a policy, just because there's a number of policies which we need to update. But the practice, what I can absolutely assure the board, is the practice has changed, and nobody would be asked to use their annual leave as part of return to work.
Thank you, Paul. And do we have a date for sorting the policy?
There's a number of policies out of date which we need to update. I don't have a precise date.
Okay.
I can update outside of this, but but certainly the practice has definitely changed.
That's the important thing. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So the next point, I did notice, Richard, that you've got in the fire marshal's bit, and it must relate in part to what's on the action log. Although it's down for you and James.
I'd forgotten it was on the action log, but I hadn't forgotten the action. So Arlene and I talked about this, and we thought that the three main things that we could do would be to embed the question in our pre-board walkabouts, to embed the question in any form of ward accreditation system that we run, and to embed the question in the what should we say, pre-CQC walkabout visits that we do. And once we've done that, to point that out to our clinical leaders, consultants and nurses and AHPs, and that we thought would help to promote use.
Lovely. Thank you, Richard. And James, you wanted to add to that?
My weekly message to all ESCH site staff today will also reinforce the role of fire marshals.
Thank you. Thurza, the next one was for you. It's about the cars.
Yes, so the service did start as planned at the beginning of October, but it's taken longer than we might have anticipated to get some activity information. I was keen we had that before I circulated the notes, so I can do that now.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. So the next one, which is, I think, covered. So this was James Marsh for you about including information on place, which is done in the report, isn't it?
It's not within this report, but the
No, in a report on the agenda, is it not the place stuff?
No, I think it's about. Sorry, yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, sorry.
I'm thinking, oh God, it's me again. You know, not only am I not keeping to time and trying to give people machines that aren't working, now I haven't read my papers properly. Okay, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, James. So the next one is about cyber security, and this is for you, Stephen and Andrew. Are you going to take it?
Andrew may want to come in. I mean, essentially, the division of labour is that the Finance Committee leads on all IT-related risks, which includes, obviously, cybersecurity. The Audit Committee has a broader role in relation to overseeing cybersecurity as a whole, but sort of, if I can put it this way, day-to-day risks are overseen by Finance. The broader position of the Trust is overseen by the Audit Committee. It's a double-handed responsibility.
Yes, I think we know that, don't we?
Yeah.
So, anyway, there we go. We've absolutely clarified it. And the next three are not yet due. So people happy to acknowledge the action log and the reports that we've had. We will move on to the Chief Executive's update. Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll be brief. So thank you. Keep some time up. In regards to just a few elements, we're clearly still feeling, despite the visit this morning, pressure on both the EDs across Epsom and St Helier. And last week we went into a business continuity, which is unusual for ESTH, but we needed to do that to try and free up beds to enable us to get patients appropriately placed out of ED. At St George's, we have been nominated or anointed or given one of the 6 trusts in London to test out and implement what is called the North Bristol model, which is about how we actually federate risk across the whole organisation rather than leaving lots of patients unbedded in ED. The bit in order to do that is that we also have to federate that risk post-hospital as well as pre-hospital, and what more we can do. So once we're going to really have a go at St George's, and I think you're quite interested, James, about how we might then pick up the learning from that about how we might apply it to Epsom and St Helier. NHSE have also published its operating framework, which helpfully lays out the various roles and responsibilities between NHS providers, the ICBs and NHS England. Happy to give more if you haven't seen that paper, that piece of paper, that policy, put that in the reading room. And really just a couple more good things. Alex Shaw we've appointed as the Chief Operating Officer at ESTH. I think he's been here over a month now. And he's actually going...
2 months?
Even 2 months, yeah. He hit the ground running and going down very well. And just to also congratulate Swelliok for being shortlisted for the National Orthopaedic Alliance Award, and we've also had 3 different teams from the STH shortlisted for HSJ Patient Safety Award. So, do we know the news of that? I think we did, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. Yes, we do. We didn't win, though. Highly commended.
Okay, well, good to know. And thank you, Jacqueline, for running through that so speedily. So, Peter?
Thank you, Jacqueline, for the report. Just a couple of quick follow-ups on. You mentioned the business continuity incidents most recently, I think last Thursday, Friday. How concerned should we be at this stage, relatively early in the winter season, if you like, that that's happened at this stage, or was it a useful test point for things subsequently? But just to get a bit more of a feel for that. And the second was around the ICS, which you've referenced in your report, and we touched on at George's yesterday, and whether it's appropriate now or later, welcome your thoughts on how well it's working for within this context of Epsom St Helier, complicated by the double ICS position, how that's working, and finally just noting as part of that process, the system working, the comments yesterday from local authority social services that they're under immense, even greater pressure than normal, with likelihood of quite significant save. And the reason for mentioning it here is obviously the impact that could have on delayed discharges and all of that end point of the process. So it's just maybe a warning sign of things to come, but perhaps more for you to focus on the ICS element would be helpful.
So in terms of the business continuity, I would say it's not normal full stop for ESTH to go into business continuity in years gone past, even months gone past. So it is a worry, but I think the other thing that James would say is it's also a really good opportunity to see and learn what we can do in business continuity and what we're not doing and when we're out of it. So what are we learning that we could apply that actually helps actually smooth the discharge or the pathway of patients through, and ask the question, why can't we do that normally? So I think that was, apart from helping, it actually we learnt a lot from it that we will go towards implementing to try and get a good pull. What patients get, they get pushed through rather than pulled through in terms of flow. And we need to get into a pull situation where elements of the pathway are enabling patients to move to the next bit of the pathway rather than one department trying to push them through there or push them out of the hospital, because actually for them that's a better thing and it actually smooths pathways and it's actually a lot less stress for everybody if we could work in a different way. So some learning for us with that. I'd say working with the ICS, ICB, ICP is still quite new. They're only a few months into that. I think for South West London, losing the chair, the independent chair, has been probably more difficult. We'll work with the new chair when they come, and yet we can talk about that as we did at George's yesterday in part 2 about working with them. And I think yes, it always is a complicating factor working across Surrey and South West London. One of the things that I with COO for South West London have done is set up a tertiary SpecCom board with Surrey. So trying to work with them because they're really important to us on so many levels, and trying to forge some better relationships and links through some of that to try and enable us to work differently. But I think there's also a bit with us with Surrey about how we get a bit more involved in some of the decision making at Surrey board level, which I can talk with Claire about, and we can pick up with Thursday and with James. And there was a last question you asked.
Well, it was part of that system thing.
Yeah.
Problems, and I thought it may be more for Thursday.
And I think the bit for me about the local authorities, none of us are in a great place at the moment. So I happened to have a meeting with the new chief executive of Wandsworth, and I do the same with whether it be Sutton, Merton, or Surrey. What is it we need to do together? And rather than just trying to throw bombs at each other, how do we work really differently? How do we share risk? How do we share some funding, actually? Because, both in terms of stopping more patients getting in, how are we really going to look at that together? And how do we really look at the 20, is it 80 plus 5 or 20 plus 5? I can never remember which way around it is. It 20 plus 20 plus 5. And that's supposed to be at place, but how do we really drive some of that? And so we can look at those 20% of patients that are causing the 80% and how do we really help keeping them at home? And also, I think we all agree that for older patients, we know the longer we keep them here, the more they decondition. Every week, 10% of muscle mass from an older patient will go being in hospital. And actually, it's in all of our interests, and it's cheaper to get older patients into the right place earlier than actually by the time you actually manage to get them out of hospital, they're actually needing more care than they would have done if we got them home a week or 2 weeks earlier. So how do we genuinely do that without it being really, really difficult? Because actually we need to work together in a far different collegiate way. And I think we get some of that. And actually we have good working relationships, but the bid is how do we take it on another step, I would say.
Thank
I don't know if you think about that.
No, I absolutely agree, Jacqueline. I think you've done very good. Any other points people want to? No? Okay. If we could note Jacqueline's report, please. And then that takes us on to item 2 on the agenda and the committee reports. And the first one is Peter's Audit Committee. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. And I can be brief. It was a good meeting last week and generally positive, actually, in terms of progress being made, including on the internal audit plan. It was on track. We heard there was good implementation of the recommendations. So top marks here, actually in a better place than it has to be said in the other place in terms of follow through on recommendations. Just one area which James is aware of where there has been a lack of response, but we're following that up out of committee, as it were. We discussed in some depth an internal audit report around complaints. And whilst it was a moderate, in other words, not really bad, but it was at the bottom end of moderate, and there were quite a number of issues identified for improvement around complaints. And I think, Arlene, you were very much aware of this, and you may wish to comment that you're very much on the case, but it's an area which is going to require quite a bit of work to get to a better place. But just to complete a couple of other points, we had an update on the kind of managing conflicts of interest, and it was striking again. George is already on a new system that makes it really easy to log your areas of interest, and I think it's work in progress, or it's an area for Epsom St Helier to get up to speed on in the next couple of months. So it's an area for focus, I think, to make sure that that's working as well as it can. On cyber, we heard no major issues at the moment. Training's in a good place. High percentage of staff being trained. What we have asked to come back to the next committee is more of an overarching view on what we call a kind of maturity index. So it's looking at all the different elements of cyber preparation and looking at the big picture, are there areas of concern? So as it stands, we seem to be in a good place, but we just want to test that proposition going forward. And then finally, Chair, just to log that I think in the last report I mentioned about going out to tender on internal audit and counter fraud. At that point, we were looking at a group-wide proposition. Following further discussion within South West London, it's now intended to go for a kind of South West London proposition, joining up with Croydon and Kingston, that's right. And that was agreed by both the audit committee here as well as at George's, and subsequently being signed off by chairs and CFOs and other leading executives. So that's now out to tender, and we're hopeful of a positive response to the larger contract, and it will demonstrate hopefully some of the benefits and learning from working within that wider South West London group. So we'll get the results of that, I think, in February, and we'll move on from there. So, Chair, that's all for now. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Peter. I can't see any other hands. It's quite an awkward table. Did you want to say anything, Arlene? No requirement. It was just that Peter said that you might like to. So,
just about the complaints, as Peter said, we had a really good discussion at the committee. But there is, just to reassure the board, that we are, Richard and I, are working with the teams around ensuring that we get on top of these complaints. So we'll manage it almost at group level so that the team on the ground can get on and do the day-to-day. So we will resolve the backlog issue together.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Arlene. Anne, were you looking at me because you want to say something? Are you just...
I'm ready for the next one.
You just think, would you get on, please?
No, I don't want to waste any time, but I'm ready to go.
So we're asked to note that report. I can't see any other hands, but that does take us neatly then on to the Estates Assurance Committee, which is Anne.
Thank you, Chair. So you have the report in front of you. Thank you, Teresa, for rushing out and printing it off so that I can actually see it. So the Estates Assurance Committee is meeting irregularly, I think. We are really struggling to find dates. We haven't managed to find a regular date for it, which makes it quite difficult. But we have worked through a number of themes around estates. So we've worked through water, fire, ventilation. The last time we met, we talked about low voltage electricity, really exciting stuff. And actually, we talked about the risks that are on the corporate risk register and the various assurance processes that there are through the authorised engineers report. And we actually felt, having given it a good going over, that we were reasonably assured that actually, in terms of certainly low voltage electricity, that the trust was safe, that although they were having to do things in a difficult way, all the right things were being done, and it was in a relatively assured position. So we then talked about kind of the future of the committee, because it's a time-limited committee. We still have a number of areas that we would like to look at, and they're highlighted in the report. So lifts, which is obviously a major area, medical gases, decontamination, and high voltage electricity, which we also need to look at. And our aim, we're struggling because it's November and we've got 4 more things to look at. We were hoping that by the end of the financial year, we would have got through everything and we could go back to incorporating estates into the Finance Committee. I think we might struggle to have worked through our list by then, but I think a target in the early part of the next financial year would be good. But it felt like, we'd had a good meeting, we'd had a good discussion, and it was one of the things we could cross off our immediate worry list.
Thank you, Anne. That's really helpful. Any questions to Anne on the Estates Assurance Subcommittee? Stephen.
One quick one, and it links to the future of the committee. Just kind of, notwithstanding when exactly the committee winds up and transfers the responsibility to finance, but just kind of how will the committee judge and how will the board get a sense of the level of assurance on estates issues such that we feel confident wrapping it back into the finance committee? When Georges did a similar thing, as you know, a few years ago, there was a kind of stock take at the end before that decision was made, and just kind of what will that process be to judge that we can wrap estates issues into a committee that is has a very broad remit and a lot on its plate already?
So I can see James wants to come in, but I imagine we'd do a very similar sort of process to the one that we did at George. I think we would need to review the work that we've overseen, see the areas that are still on our kind of worry list, and make sure that they're in a state where they could be managed by a committee that has a much broader remit, which is why, although we hope to have concluded it this year, my suspicion is it will take into next year. And I do think we need to be cognizant as well of where we are on the new hospital, because to some extent these issues are dependent on how long we need to manage them before we get the new hospital. But if he may, Chair, I think James wanted to add to that.
Itching. So I think, it's a really helpful question. I think that, reflecting on the work of the committee, one of the issues was that actually we hadn't had a regular review of the premises assurance model through the committees. So I think it would be a combination of a review of the premises assurance model alongside the risk register, alongside any outstanding issues from any of the AE reports that we've reviewed, and then finally a piece on what we've talked about previously in terms of resetting the site governance to include more estates and facilities oversight at site leadership team level as well, because what's really important is that if we're going to reset this into our BAU committees, that we actually have to feed in from the executives and the site level mechanisms, and I think that's the bit that I think needs to be in place and be operating before we would be in a place, as Anne says, to stand down that Estates Assurance Committee.
That's really helpful, thank you, James. And sounds like the right kind of stock take to me. So if there's no other points, could we note that report and move on to the Finance Committee in common, which is Anne again?
Thank you, Chair. So a number of these items will come up elsewhere on the agenda. As Jacqueline said in her report, managing the money actually this year is one of our top priorities because it's a really difficult place to be. At ESTH, we have a slightly bigger deficit year to date than we anticipated. Some of the deficit is caused by the Elective Recovery Fund money, where we're being asked across the system not to forecast receipt. So I think eventually that will be dealt with in some way, it will come good. But we are behind on our cost improvement programmes, or at least the ones that were in the plan. Now that might be that we were over ambitious about when we could actually get them started. But in a year where money is incredibly tight, that is worrying. We did talk about the forecast for the year, and I think that's probably a conversation for part 2. But I think it would be fair to say that although the official forecast that we're required to give is break even, that is incredibly challenging, particularly as we're now in November, so we haven't got many months left in the year. We've also started, I mean, unusually we're still kind of finalising the plan for this year, but we've also started to look at what next year would look like. And it's fair to say that looks probably more challenging than this year. If you look at where we start, if you strip out from the spend forecast where we've made one-off savings, actually you kind of add them back in because you have to make them again next year. Next year looks to be really challenging, and I think that means that we need to think of some quite, well, as we've said before, group-wide, system-wide sort of approaches to some of this. That's going to be the only way to solve it. But as I said, probably more in part 2. I think we gave performance a reasonable sort of airing at the committee. Unfortunately, we didn't, because Thurza wasn't able to attend, we didn't actually manage to have a proper discussion around community, and we do need to think about how we actually include a proper discussion on that in our conversations at the committee. But the performance is holding up well, actually, at ESDH. So we didn't have some of the concerns that we've had elsewhere, actually, about the performance here. And certainly, if not meeting national targets, certainly holding up well relative to peers. So that was good. I won't go through other things. We took some routine reports from pathology, from procurement, on things like breaches and waivers, but unless people want me to try and remember them, and I'd have to do it from memory because I can't access them, I won't go there.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne. Any questions or comments for Anne? A lot of us were at the committee, so no. So if we could note that report, thank you. Moves on to the People Committee in Common. Martin.
I'll focus on things at quite a high level for purposes of the public, and also I'll focus on the assurance aspects. So the first thing is, in terms of the measures and the data we look at, probably the most important things are the rate of sickness, the vacancy rate, and the rate at which people are leaving. All of those are high, but from an assurance point of view, at least we are able to draw on bank staff and other staff through those arrangements, and we have a very large and very effective team which is able to fill those holes. In terms of the disclosure and barring service, as part of a national initiative, we have been trying to improve our compliance, and particularly compliance in the sense that different levels of that are required depending on the actual job that you do. And as people join an organisation and move around, sometimes that can get out of line. And substantial progress has been made, and the team has done an excellent job in terms of improving our compliance. You'll see in the report that there's I guess a fairly negative piece about policies and how many policies are out of date. I think whilst policies are incredibly important because it helps us to treat people consistently, and for line managers to know what they can and can't do, this is easy to overstate. Unusually, we put a date on all our policies at which it expires. So if you don't get round to looking at it, it just shows that it's expired. How much of a problem the fact it's expired is, as opposed to just putting a new date on it, is rather another matter, and the team are working through that. In terms of well-being, there's a huge amount of activity in the Trust on well-being, and the committee asked if, like the other areas, we can have more metrics. And we had the first look at a scoreboard. As is often the case when you try and measure this kind of stuff, it's a little difficult, because if you take, for instance, so we saw data on the number of staff who are going through counselling. If that number increases next month, we're a little unsure whether or not that is a good thing because we're reaching more people, or a bad thing because more of our staff are receiving counselling. So I think some more work's going to need to be done on that, and it's also about if we can move it from rather than activity, if we can move it to effectiveness. And huge subjects, but given the time I won't say much about them. This is the time of year where we complete 2 key reports, Workforce Race Equality Standard and Workforce Disability Equality Standard, which is both our measurement of our progress and also our action plan for the following year, and both of those have been completed. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin. Any questions for Martin or comments on the report from the People Committee in Common? No? Okay, so thank you very much, Martin, for going through that so clearly, and we will note that report. So that takes us on to the Quality Committee in Common, which Derek is very kindly going to lead on, probably with the assistance of Chris, because Derek wasn't at both the meetings. So over to you, Derek.
No, so I'm presenting on behalf of Varuna, who is away, yes. And the report covers 2 months, September and October. And as you say, I wasn't at the October meeting, I was at the September meeting, and I've had a briefing from Varuna in preparing this presentation. And I think it's fair to say that the Quality Committee is taking a large body of information from both trusts, and these are long and detailed meetings. And some of the stuff that comes through does reflect that we're working in a system that's very much under pressure, and that emphasises the need to have grip at all levels within the processes that are looked at. In terms of headlines, one of the concerning headlines is the hospital standardised mortality rate, and which has been rising for the last 6 months or so, and we're slightly above 100%. 100% is the death rate you would expect for patients with the illnesses that we code our patients as having. And obviously there's an area of concern that's been addressed by an investigation. There's no particular themes that have emerged. There was a concern that it might be because of delayed or extended stays in emergency department, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And we're now looking back at the coding, because the other reason the HSMR could be high is because we're not adequately capturing the morbidity and likelihood of death of the people with the conditions that are coming in. So there's an external review going on with that. Other areas of concern, there is a backlog in dealing with the SIs, but there is an action plan to deal with that. We are concerned about fundamentals of care, and that's a headline issue for the committee. And the rate of falls is one way of measuring that. And there's focused attention on that, and particularly on preventing pressure ulcers as well. The IPC we're going to review later in the meeting, but we felt that the scores there showed some improvement in specific areas, and they're reflected in the report. And the maternity report is also covered within the Quality Committee. And although the rate of tears has gone up, we do run a fairly high caesarean section rate. This isn't necessarily considered a bad thing, but there's a great deal of attention going on within maternity. And as we've heard a very positive report from maternity this morning, we feel that that's been adequately addressed, and there's good assurance of what's going on within maternity. One area that isn't fully addressed perhaps is carbon monoxide monitoring, but I think there's an issue around the hardware required to do that isn't available or isn't in place. So that's to summarise the key headlines from the Quality Committee. I'm happy to take any questions or take any comments from Chris.
Very many thanks, Derek. Very comprehensive and clear, given particularly you weren't at one of the meetings. Chris, was there anything you wanted to add?
Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, I only ever get to the second half of the quality meeting because of a clash with Surrey Downs Health and Care. But the one thing I wanted to add was, I think the desire by the committee to make sure that we did follow through with those, or with reports on the areas of concern that have been raised, which is right and proper. I'm not saying they haven't been followed through, but we were going to make a particular effort to make sure that we monitor these areas of concern and hope and that they improve as time goes by. Noting also that some of the areas of concern are beyond our control, which is frustrating all round, I'm sure, even more so for those who work within the hospital. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Anne?
So, two questions really. You said that the sort of mortality was higher than it should have been, than the statistical expectation. And I think what I heard you say was you weren't sure whether that was because the data wasn't recording the acuity correctly.
That's one possible explanation, yes. So one of the things that I think the deep dive is going to look at is the way in which these patients are coded.
Yeah, but what I was going to go on to say was I've seen elsewhere where we've had similar concerns around death rates, and the starting point is challenge the data. And my question was going to be, are we confident that we've not missed the opportunity to say there's some reasons why people are dying? Because actually we heard on our visit this morning that that deaths were high. And it's just making sure that we're not jumping to the data's wrong and not. Shall I pause there?
Can I respond to that? Because
before I ask my second question.
Yeah.
Well, let's deal with it.
Can I respond? Because I'm quite confident that what's happened is that we've looked at the causes for HSMR first, and then without finding any specific cause, and with looking at the structured judgment reviews of deaths, and without finding any consistent themes, and then said, well, maybe the data's misleading us. So I think you're exactly right. But the jumping, asking the question about the data has come second, not first, would be my understanding of what's happened. James is nodding, so maybe.
I think that is Richard's going to come in. I think it's a good challenge, Anne, but I think the report that went to Quality Committee was of the highest possible standard. But Richard is going to say something that's rather more meaningful than that.
Well, I'll try to. I was going to try and give a little bit of an overview, because this isn't absolutely simple and straightforward, but it is very important. And what we know is that by the two measures of hospital mortalities, so the HSMR and the SHIMI, which are slightly different measures, our mortality has been climbing, and the SHIMI has been climbing since the beginning of last year. And it's always right to think both about quality issues. Is this real, and does it imply a quality issue? And data issues. Is this a data quality issue? And we have done both in parallel, and Derek's absolutely right. We've done both in parallel. And we're continuing to look at both, and it's absolutely right that we should continue to look at both. And if I just start with the quality questions first, it seemed reasonable, first of all, to look at those conditions where we think we've got a higher mortality that we might expect, because you can break these things down by condition. And we looked at those conditions to ask ourselves if we're looking after people with sepsis as well as hospital, for instance. And we didn't see any major issue that needed fixing that might explain the overall trend. Then we took the known fact that overcrowded EDs are associated with subsequent increase in mortality. Doesn't tell you who's died why when they've been in an overcrowded ED, but we know there's an association. So I think very reasonably, our colleagues picked out those patients who had died, whose stay in ED was prolonged, and we looked to see if we could see quality issues in the care they'd had in ED that might explain their subsequent death. And that work, I think, was done very thoroughly and didn't pick out any theme. I don't think it's right to infer from that an overcrowded ED never impacts on patient outcomes. We know statistically that it does, but when we try and look for individual cases of that, we don't see them clearly. If I was summarising about what I think is the important quality work on this, I'm absolutely sure that the most important quality work we can do is the work we are doing to improve patient flow through the hospital. And that can only be beneficial for patient safety. So even as we look into other aspects of this, we should continue that work, and that should be our quality priority. In terms of the data, it's absolutely right that we've had a look at the coding, asking ourselves, are we undercoding the complexity of people with multiple long-term conditions? Because if we were, that would impact negatively in an artifactual, in other words, non-real way, on our mortality. Our internal review of that suggested that we're not undercoding, but we're not satisfied, so we're getting an external audit of that. We've also been in touch with NHS Digital, and we've said to NHS Digital, do they think that it might have affected our mortality statistic that we do same-day emergency care and that we don't report our same-day, that we follow the rules in not reporting our same-day emergency care patients as if they were grouped together with the other inpatients. And NHS Digital has said, yes, that might impact on your mortality statistic to artifactually suggest your mortality is higher than the statistic ideally would, because the shimmy has not yet been adapted to take into account the fact that if you remove from the statistics the many relatively well patients who can have same-day emergency care, who are most unlikely to die but who come in great numbers, if you take those out, then what you're left with is a pool of patients with a higher likelihood of death, and so you have an artifactual misperception that your mortality rate has increased. And I know all that's quite detailed. If you wanted me to summarize in one line, I would say we should keep an open mind about data issues, particularly in the light of what NHS Digital has said. That's helpful, and we'll keep pursuing it, but we must not assume that we do not have a quality problem, because we know that overcrowded emergency departments and poor patient flow impact on patient safety, and our work on this is the most important thing we're doing.
Thank you, Richard. That could not have been clearer or more helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Anne, I hope you found that.
I found that very helpful. I just wanted to test it as a not a member of Quality Committee. I wanted to just test that out. Similarly, on serious incidents, it says in the report, and it's difficult to know, isn't it, if you've got a high number, is that because people are good at reporting, or is it because you've had a lot of incidents? But 5 and 7 respectively looked a bit high to me. And it says in Aruna's report that the committee was assured around the commitment to learning from them, and yet we heard on our visit that they were quite behind in terms of investigating serious incidents. And I don't know how you marry up not being on top of the investigations with a commitment to learning. So I just wondered if anybody was able to say a bit more about that commitment.
Undoubtedly, Anne, again, it's the right challenge, but the committee have looked at it really carefully. You're going to start, Arlene, and then Richard may want to add to it.
Yeah, I can start. So similar to the backlog of complaints, we also have a backlog of SIs. I suppose it's really important to highlight that every time an incident occurs, there is a rapid review done that is taken to a group, a trust-wide group, where the incident is reviewed, early learning identified, and any immediate actions taken while the investigation happens. So all the early actions would have been taken anyway. And similar to complaints, Richard and I have had a discussion. We're going to ensure that we pull and sort out the backlog while the team gets on, so they can continue to keep on top. But all of the incidents and the SIs that are outstanding have had an immediate rapid response review and immediate actions done.
Thank you, Arlene. Richard?
Absolutely, I agree completely with what Arlene's just said. Just the extra points I'd add in. Firstly, and I guess everyone knows this, but firstly, if we want to look at trends in serious incident numbers, it's good to pan back and look at a longer period of time than just 1 or 2 months, because they go up and down randomly between 1 and 2 months. Secondly, Anne's question, serious incidents really are going up. Is that a good thing because people are identifying them, or a bad thing because they're happening? It's a bad thing because they're happening. It's only a good thing if the starting point is a bad culture of reporting, and then somebody starts to do work to fix that bad culture, and then the numbers go up because what was previously not revealed is revealed. I don't think that's the case in ESTH. So if we have rising serious incident numbers genuinely as a trend, that's a bad thing, not a good thing. I would not say the same about DASIX reports in general, for instance, or incidents in general, where if you say, how do we reconcile those two things, the conventional way of reconciling them is that the proportion of reported incidents that harm patients should go down if you're getting safer. But if the denominator of total numbers of reported incidents go up, that's taken as a healthy reporting culture. So that's the conventional approach. And just on our visit to Buckley Ward, I think it's just important to say the matron was talking about incidents, not serious incidents. And the matron was talking about falls, for instance, and investigating falls. It's not good if there's a backlog. It was great that she was working her way through it, but she wasn't talking about serious incidents. And although she did use the language of having a large number of deaths, she wasn't making a statistical observation or necessarily a problematic observation. She was making an observation about a 33-bedded ward with lots of elderly patients, and we have to remember there's a significant proportion of the citizens of this country die in hospital, and sometimes through choice and appropriately. So she talked a lot about caring end-of-life care as well. So I wouldn't want people to have the impression that we have a statistical evidence of a higher than should be mortality on a particular ward, because we don't break it down to that level. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Richard. Anne, is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Lovely. Jacqueline.
I think, Richard, Anne sort of asked a similar question to what I was going to ask, which is about the mortality, the shimmy, etc. I suppose my own, and I think you sort of answered it, with if we look at the coding, it's not the coding, and we go, well, we're doing QI, patient improvement, flow improvement, which we think will help. Is there anything else we need to do if we because you look at it and it is still on its way up. So I suppose I just have a niggle that if it's not this and it's not that, and we think it's that, but we haven't got any evidence, whether there's anything else we should be doing for that. Because I know that people, both in the organisation and sat here, will want to try and support making improvements if that's the case. Yes, please, Richard.
Yeah, I don't want to take the niggle away. I've got the niggle as well. I think we should have I think the board and the Quality Committee need to have that niggle until we start to see it flatten off. I think it is plausible that it's all a data issue because of the issue of same-day emergency care. If that is the case, what we'll see is that as all trusts fall into line and do what they should do in terms of reporting, then by definition the mean will reset and our mortality figures will go back to where they should be. But that will take time. But in the meantime, I think it's really important to have the niggle and to be continuously thinking about areas where we have clinical concerns. James wants to come as well.
I think it's right that we're always continually challenging and never satisfied. That said, if we know from our performance report that our SDEC numbers have continued to climb, our shimmy and HSMR have continued to climb. We have an indication that, a fairly concrete indication that shimmy and HSMR were not set up to deal with SDEC in the way that we're now doing it. I think what we should be looking to do is be more active than wait for the indicators to reset. I think we need to try and pursue it to the extent that we try and back out, effectively re-engineer the analysis to see whether that would reset us back to where we are, because I think that would be moving us towards more concrete assurance. In a sense, I'm not happy to wait for everyone just to catch up with us, because I think we'll be sat on a really worrying indicator for too long.
Thank you, James. That's really helpful. James, Marsh.
I think it's a really helpful conversation that we're having and really important, and we absolutely cannot be complacent and say that data is behind where we are in our practice. I think it's important the Quality Committee and the board continue to keep a focus on this and to continue to ask questions. I think it would be helpful when we come to look at the IQPR to spend a little bit of time thinking about some of the parameters on fundamentals of care, because I know there's some ongoing work on fundamentals of care and we do need to undergo continuous improvement, and I know Arlene and the team are working on aligning award accreditation programme to look at this in more detail, and I think we need a little bit more assurance on this too.
Thank you, James. I don't want to perpetuate the conversation, but it's left me with a question that I need to ask now. And that is, George's has got an SDEC as well. So if it was true about the SDEC thing, wouldn't we see that in the George's numbers?
As if we were reporting it in the same way or not.
We're not.
Right, okay, that's the answer. So that's the answer to my question. Fine, thank you.
We were all in there going, oh, well.
Right, okay, but you'll understand why I asked the question, because there's such a divergence between the two sets
But
of
we should
figures.
ask that question at George's, actually, about, well, should we be reporting it in the way that we're reporting it?
Well, sorry.
Yes,
So
it is.
that's been picked up, has it, Richard? Excellent. Good. Right. That was all on the back of the Quality Committee report, but I think a really good discussion. Thank you, colleagues. And James summarised for all of us that neither the board nor the Quality Committee will in any way take their foot off this one. It's really important. But I would want to say the quality of paperwork and debate at Quality Committee has been very good. So I do think the Quality Committee have been, have got their foot on the pedal on this one. I can't see any other hands, so if we could note that report and move on to Sutton Health and Care and Surrey Downs Health and Care. Chris.
Thank you very much. You have the report in the papers, and there's, though there is both Sutton and Surrey Downs Health and Care, of course they're providing similar, though not identical, services, and a lot of the issues will be the same for both of them. I just wanted to pick out a couple of points from the report. The first is around Sutton Health and Care is what was called a Big Tent engagement event, which took place over 2 days. Fantastic number of staff put forward to attend. They were really well planned sessions with a lot of engagement from the staff, and an opportunity for them to talk about what was good, but also an opportunity for them to talk about things they weren't happy about. We will be getting, as a board, we'll be getting a report on that in the next few weeks, and we'll be happy to bring any key points that come back that will follow up in our report here. Sutton Health and Care has been part of the London Ambulance pilot around urgent community response cars with the purpose of this is I like to describe it as being to provide better care for residents in the community, and this is achieved by getting access to qualified care in their own homes, and potentially therefore reducing the need for people to come to A&E or be admitted to hospital. The priority for me is not to avoid hospital admission. The priority is to provide better care by providing care in the community. But it should have the knock-on of helping the trust acute side of it as well. In partnership, the provider partnership through the PCNs are developing a primary care-led community unit on the St Helier Hospital site. This should open early in December and will provide relatively short stay beds for patients who are medically optimised but not practically quite ready to go home. So 2 or 3 day admission time is the plan, and that should therefore help free up the acute ward beds at the trust. James has been actively involved with that and may want to add something at the end of this. This is part of our winter preparedness plans for the trust. Around Surrey Downs, equally escalation beds will be being opened at 2 community hospitals, again as part of winter preparedness. The final thing I wanted to say was around staffing numbers, which has sort of been alluded to by Martin. Both the community sectors have high rates of vacancy. We have, in the assurance side of things, challenged that regarding whether there's safe working, but we are assured that with the use of bank and agency staff, the services are still safe for patients. The problem, I guess, arises because it puts pressure on the existing staff, which isn't a good thing. And secondly, it may, though in fact both the planned care services from both community services are improving and reducing waiting lists. If there was less vacancies, those waiting lists could go down faster than they are at the moment. Pleased to say, though, that though the vacancy rates are going up at the moment, actually sickness levels are going down, so that's a good thing. And I think that's really what I wanted to say. Happy to take any questions. I don't know if Thurza wants to add anything.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's really comprehensive. Any questions for Chris? As we said earlier, I do want to get to the point where both FIC and Quality Committee are able to look at the performance data, Thurza and Chris, and I think we're going to have to look at the agenda planning for both committees. It must be very annoying for you, and I feel it's slightly unsatisfactory every time you have to go off to something else and we haven't got to it. So I think we need to pay some attention to that.
Thank you. Sorry, just if I might
Yes.
add, sorry, just around some of these, around the Quality Committee side, we actually are planning a meeting with Aruna, Thurza and myself and Aruna, for when she returns, so that we can look at how community fits in with the Quality Committee. Thank you.
Good, great. Sorry, Chloe.
Good to involve the rest of us.
Yeah, it would be helpful if the governance team could be involved in that as well. Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. Any further points from colleagues' notes? So could we note that report, please? Thank you very much. So we're almost 40 minutes behind. So I'd like to pick up a bit of time if we can, without in any way limiting debate. I'm conscious that the next 4 reports have all been to committees and had quite thorough a debate. So if we could concentrate on either from people who weren't at committee and didn't hear the debate, or new points or really important points, if people don't mind, I'd be really grateful, so that we don't completely lose control of the agenda. So the next item is 2.2, the Integrated Performance Report. Is this straight to you, James?
Yeah, so I'll start and then I'll hand over to colleagues to pick up the quality and safety aspects and to highlight any key things. I think that many of the themes that we have around urgent care and flow have already been picked up. We continue to do quite well in terms of reducing attendances, reducing 0 and 1 day length of stay admissions. Much of that is through same-day emergency care. The issue continues to be flow through the hospital, and I will talk in more detail in our winter plan paper about some of the things that we're doing to address that going into the winter, including the facility at St Helier that Chris has just referenced. On the elective care side, the board will know that we had a significant increase in referrals through the back end of last financial year going into the start of this financial year. That led to a significant growth in the waiting list. We have, through a combination of increased activity, increased transformation in the outpatient pathway and increased productivity, we're sort of on top of that at the moment in terms of the overall additions to the waiting list. Our concern is the shape of the waiting list. So obviously with a very significant bulge of patients a few months ago, that bulge is now moving through in terms of waiting times, and that's something that we're going to need to continue to manage going into the second half of the year to make sure that we are not just treating the right volume of people, but treating people in a timely way, and that will need some further intervention, I think, in terms of looking at what is on our waiting list at the moment and understanding whether patients, what kind of intervention patients really need, working in partnership with our GPs in particular, to make sure that we're offering advice and guidance wherever possible. On the cancer side, again, it's a story of relative success. So we are continuing to meet the key cancer standards, in particular the 62-day standard and the FDS standard. So these are a really good marker of how we're managing to treat patients with cancer in a timely way. I would say that the pressure on that pathway is growing. In particular, we saw significant pressure of referrals in August. And I think there are 2 things to highlight around this. Firstly, our ability to create diagnostic capacity will become a rate limiting step, and so this is something that we need to continue to manage. And secondly, we are pulling
capacity from our planned care pathways to support our cancer pathways, so from our routine pathways. So increasingly, people with non-cancer presentations are waiting longer because we are having to prioritise people with cancer presentations. So whilst it's really good that we are seeing people with cancer, it is coming at a cost to people on other pathways. But we did do quite a bit of detail on this at FIC, so I'm not proposing to rehearse any more there. I'm happy to take any questions, but to hand over to other colleagues as well.
Thank you, James. James, I think I feel I should have probably come to you first. Was there anything that you wanted to say?
No, thank you, Chair. I think possibly between James and myself, we need to work through what the order is in terms of how we present this, and we'll take that offline and work through. But we've set up a new internal assurance process for the site leadership team to meet with the group executive and to review the IQPR separately on a monthly basis, and I think that will add an additional level of assurance to feed up to the relevant board subcommittees.
Thank you very much indeed, James. I was slavishly following the agenda, and the fact that when I went to you first at George's yesterday, you quickly handed over to Kate, so I kind of made an assumption and I shouldn't have done, so my apologies for that. Right, any other hands? Chris?
Hi,
and then Peter.
Thank you. Just 3 or 4 points which I'll run through all together, if that's okay. First of all, and this is not in order of importance, first of all, the report contains a lot of acronyms, which I struggle with, and I wondered if we could at least have an indicator as to somewhere in the report as to what they mean. Secondly, the graphs that we have are great and give a lot of information. A lot of them don't have a target or have target to be confirmed, and I think targets can be false, but it's a good idea to have some idea of what the ambition is to achieve with some of these. And thirdly, I'm sorry to bang on about, thirdly, I noticed that St George's record a number of patients where a DOLS has been applied for, which I think is a really useful safeguarding sort of bit of information. I note that we don't record that on our report here, and I would encourage us to think about whether that's a good idea or not. And finally, I'm going to bang on about the lack of improvement in our dementia screening rates, and how it would be good to see, and important, not just good, but important to see an improvement of that. Whether it's down to a data collection thing, though I did on our visit to Alex Wall today ask, was it difficult to record dementia screening, and was told no, it's not difficult. But I think we need an answer as to why that's not improving. I know a lot of work has been done to try and improve it, but it's not producing the outcomes, or at least not that we can see. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So I think the first 3 points are probably for you, James Marsh, are they not? And then Arlene, you'd like to come in on the dementia screening.
So I think I can remember 2 of the first 3 points. So the acronyms and the delineation of targets.
Acronyms, graphs and DOLS.
So acronyms, point well made, Chris, and we will definitely try and make the front page of the report more easy for a non-expert to interpret. I think we have made significant progress in terms of targets. So there are red dotted lines on many of the graphs now with ambition targets, but it's still work in progress, and we'll take that back, and where appropriate we can add in ambition targets. And in terms of the DOLS, we have had some challenges in terms of the flow of information across from one trust to another to compile this report. I'll let Arlene pick up the detail of some of that on the quality elements, but we have made, I think, significant progress in the past week or two. So I'm hoping that we'll get better alignment in terms of the presentation of the data.
Thank you, James. So, Arlene, you might like to say a little bit more on that dolls point,
Yeah.
and then also the dementia screening.
Yes, so on the dolls, definitely, Chris, we have the same data, we've just never reported it in the same way, and working with James's team around what goes into the integrated report, dolls will be one of the measures. The data for Epsom and St. Helier is not difficult to collect, it's difficult to pull from the system. So we've made it really easy for staff to do the assessments on the ward, do the risk assessments, do all of that, but we're really struggling with getting IT to be able to get to the place where we can pull that data. So it's heavily dependent on somebody in IT, and they don't have the time. So we're working with them on how the teams are going to be able to go in and pull the data out. And in the meantime, the team, Dion's team, is doing manual audits, which unfortunately are not, and then we're not able to present in the same way. So it's mostly an IT issue. I'm sure there's room for improvement in how we actually do the risk assessments and the care plans, but it's mostly the reporting that we're struggling with, and we're working on that.
Thank you, Gillian. Sorry, just on that, if I might. I mean, even if it was just a snapshot report rather than a monthly report, I think that would give some reassurance, if nothing else, on the matter.
Shall we ask the executive to take it away? Snapshot reports bring their own dangers, I think. But if you could have a think about that. So I've got Peter and then Jacqueline, and then I will just run around to make sure there's no quality or people issues that people wanted to flag up. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. And in the context of the budget challenges that we're facing, which we'll come on to part two, we're keen, obviously, to identify areas where there's scope for productivity improvements and cost savings. One specific area which is identified in the report is around theatre productivity, and I'm interested, there's reference to the launch of the Theatre Improvement Programme in October. Now, it's early days, but I wonder whether there's any feedback you can give on whether or not the launch of that is starting to pay dividends, or if not, I mean, is that going to get us to the place where we need to be within the timescales we're looking at? Thank you.
So, I mean, there's a couple of things with this. I think the first is that on our reported data, actually, theatre productivity at Epsom and St Helier is generally quite strong already. We are aware of some of issues with the IT system that we use that means that we can't record some of our downtime quite as accurately as we would like. So I think part of it is really about us understanding what's within that downtime and whether there are opportunities to improve there. So I think we're building from a strong base. I think it's about making sure that we are absolutely maximising opportunities to use our theatres well. We have a degree of flexibility about what theatres we have open, and ideally what we would like to see is through that programme that we maximise the throughput through the capacity that we already have open, as a way of absorbing more of the work that we need to get done, rather than, as we could do, sort of opening more theatres that would come with a step cost. But it is a sort of reinvigoration of an existing piece of work. It is obviously in its early days, but having spoken to the division, what I would say is there is a really strong focus on it from our divisional leadership, and actually really good engagement from the consultant body. I think that there is a strong understanding that actually theatre efficiency is the way that they can contribute to really good care and to really strong throughput, and that it is something that I think we have a culture of working on here.
That's good news and bad news in the sense, good news that you're starting from a high base. Bad news in terms of, from a budget perspective, there's not much headroom from what you're describing in terms of taking out significant costs because you're already operating at a reasonable level.
Yeah, I mean, I think it you know, if we think about sort of high 70s, low 80s starting point, yes, I think that, you know, there isn't going to be, unless we find that there is some significant problem with the data, I don't think that there is going to be a massive efficiency opportunity, but I think it is incredibly important when we're thinking about our budgetary challenges that we've used every single opportunity to test ourselves on our productivity and to demonstrate that we are being as productive as possible, because I would expect, you know, for the purposes of assurance of the board and for the assurances of, you know, the wider system, that that is what we need to be testing ourselves on and be in a position to be able to say.
Thank you very much, James. Jacqueline?
Just two bits. I agree with Chris that having some areas like maternity we look at here, for ESTH we haven't got what we should be at, and I don't know when there's a difference between George's and ESTH, whether that's right or not. So one says, I can't remember, it might be bleeds 4%, one says 3%. It's just understanding if there is a difference why, but also being clear about what we're aiming for. And just to nip in a bit with George's, but I didn't notice yesterday, aiming for less than 28% Caesar rate is probably not in the right place now, given so just a bit of that. But the main question was really about VT rates, and I can't tell you how many relatives I've sat in front of there where their patients, their relatives have died, and when you look in the notes, they haven't had a VT assessment or it hasn't been followed up, because the other bit is when they have we done something about it? They haven't had anything prescribed that would stop them from having a PE and dying. So I have a slight sensitivity about VTs, but here we're not at Epsom Centre, we're not where we need to be, so just what is our plan to make that better?
Can I pick up a couple of points? On theatre utilisation, I think the baseline metrics in terms of theatre utilisation at Epsom St Helier are good. There's relatively little added gain by driving and focusing just on theatre utilisation, but there are other metrics and other quality improvement measures that the team can focus on. So, for instance, making sure that we're not using theatres where procedures could be done in day case or outpatients, and I'm really pleased to see that Epsom St Helier have engaged on a national initiative called Right Procedure, Right Place, and we know that in one of our specialties where we've got a really good engaged clinical team in urology, we are an outlier in having an opportunity for looking for alternative locations for patients to have their definitive procedures. The maternity metrics I'll let Arlene give a little bit more colour to, but I'm really pleased that there's been a good meeting to align what are the most appropriate metrics to use moving forward between Epsom St Helier and St George's, and to make sure that they can be presented in a way that is meaningful. And I absolutely agree about VTE. I'll let the local site team pick up what is new. But on a positive note, I'm glad to see that it's been prioritised locally at Epsom St Helier with the sponsoring of some of the team to participate in the QI practitioner programme, with a specific focus on delivering better, or just understanding why we haven't been able to consistently crack the VTE prophylaxis. And I think we do need to really continue to focus on some of these measures in light of the earlier part of the conversation about mortality.
Thank you, James. That's really helpful. So, Arlene, do you want to deal with the maternity point? You might want to say something about VTE as well, and if it may be that James is shaking his head, so over to you.
So I'll start with the VTE point, because I thought I was going to say that. So James has said that VTE has been a concern for me, I think, for a while in Epsom St Helier, and so we were really intent on ensuring that we could look at it in a focused way, and engaging in the QI program, I think, gives us the ability to do that, and there are several VTE reports available. On the maternity, yes, we have managed, I think, finally to get to the place where we've agreed across both Epsom St Helier and St George's on what we are going to report, because it needs to be meaningful, and I think we'd lost our way a little bit by just continuing to report what we'd reported because it was there. So we have got to that place now, and going forward, so I think even from the next report we will have a more aligned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to James and Arlene. So were there any other quality aspects of the IQPR that... Oh, I'm so sorry, Richard, I've just seen you now. So busy trying to move us on.
Sorry, it's only a detail to pick up on the VT. So Jacqueline's absolutely right about avoidable harm with anticoagulation. But the amount of harm that's done by the shortfall in us not doing VTE properly is less than the amount of harm that arises through failure to manage anticoagulant medication as we should do. And so a lot of VT events, thromboembolic events, when they do happen, are not preventable even with prophylaxis. I'm not for a moment saying it doesn't matter, it really does matter. But it matters even more that we get anticoagulation right, particularly when we're handing patients over from the community to the hospital or the hospital to the community. Transitions high-risk areas, and that's something that we're doing a lot of work on as well.
Thank you, Richard. We've seen an SI on that, haven't we? And Thurza is nodding vigorously at that point. So what I was trying to say before I caught Richard's eye, or he caught mine, was that any other quality aspects of the IQPR that anybody needed to flag up? Arlene?
So I don't think, because we don't have a separate infection control paper, but I did want to highlight again Aspergillus in that we have some outstanding actions for the Aspergillus that it wasn't an outbreak, it was a cluster earlier in the year, and we had another one in the summer. We're closer to getting where we're able to close that off, and it will come most likely to the next quality committee in common and here, just to give the assurance that we have closed the actions down. And I didn't want us to forget it, because it has been going on.
You're absolutely right, Arlene, and we've spoken about it quite a lot, which is probably not a good sign, is it? Many thanks for that. And Paul, was there anything you particularly needed to flag up?
Nothing in particular, I'd say. Appraisals are up by 3%, which is a positive, so that's good. We're sending people, managers, weekly reminders. We started to do some work with Thurza and her team in terms of recruitment and seeing how we can improve that. We've got somebody new who's starting as a deputy within the HR team. The focus will be very much around estates and facilities, where we've got quite high levels of vacancy and turnover as well. But other than that, probably not much more.
Thank you very much. Sorry? Oh, Thurza, was there anything you needed to flag up in terms of the community areas? Okay, thank you. Because I'm conscious that we didn't look at those properly in committee, and we do need to get that sorted. Okay, I can't see any other hands, so we're asked to note that report, which always seems a curiously inadequate thing after a very rich debate, but there you go. We're still very behind, and we've got 3 reports now that have been to committees, so if we can try and keep that in mind. Item 2.3 is maternity services, and we do need to spend a few minutes on this, I think, Arlene. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I suppose I would like to start the maternity report talking about the Kirkup, the latest report into maternity services, which is known as the Kirkup report. We spoke briefly about this yesterday at the George's board, but I don't think we're not planning to ignore it in any way, but wanted to bring to the attention of the board that the issues that were raised in that report were largely cultural, and so, you know, some of it you can't measure, and a lot of it was around, again, behaviours that were not being addressed, obstetricians and midwives not working together. But from a board perspective, I think it's important to highlight that the issue for the board was that the board was not open or receptive to perceived criticism, and we are planning to bring a gap analysis, as it were, against where we think we are against this report. But for us as a board, it's really about being receptive to any of the findings that we have. One of the big issues that was raised is that the trust had a combative relationship with regulators, CQC in particular, and I think somebody talked earlier about action plans, because this trust had several action plans over many years, which were just that, action plans with no real actions being taken. Poor complaints process, again, was highlighted. And so there are things in there that we need to take stock of and kind of hold a mirror up to ourselves as a board. But we will bring a gap analysis against where we think our trust lies. So that's the Kirkup report. The report that is on the on admin control is assurance to the board around CNST. So the clinical negligence scheme for trust is in year 4, and it looks at compliance against 10 safety actions. For Epsom and St Helier, the one action that is a concern that we're going to declare that we're not going to be compliant with is Safety Action 6, which asks if we're compliant with Saving Babies' Lives bundle. And we're not, because particularly during COVID, we were not able to measure this CO2 unless it's for women who smoke, because we didn't have the bit of kit to do it. And well, during COVID we weren't supposed to do it because it was blowing, and after COVID we don't have the bit of kit. And that might be, I suppose the concern is, you know, are we then putting women at risk or their babies at risk? We are doing other stuff that we can with these women, so I feel assured that we're not, but it is one that we will declare non-compliance against. But also in that safety action is around speaking to women and giving them a leaflet on checking their baby's movements, and we've not complied on that as either. So the team are looking at some specific work around that. The report also provides an update on the perinatal mortality reviews, and we've had 10 deaths, and all of them have been reviewed. No care or service delivery issues have been identified, and any learning and actions that have identified are noted and actions taken. However, we still have 2 open actions, and the team are working on those. We had 1 moderate harm incident, and that's a lady that developed an infection after cesarean section. But again, no service issues. I think when they looked at the operation notes, it was clear that she had underlying adhesions and things that made it really difficult. And she's fine. She had antibiotics and she was fine. And in terms of SIs, we hadn't any SIs for the last month, but there was an SI action outstanding, and that is in relation to updating the swab count guidelines. Again, the team is prioritizing that because I think it was meant to be done at the end of August, and we're still not having it done. And the final bit is around training that I wanted to highlight, that we do have some issues with training for prompt training, which I just had to look at again. Practical obstetric multi-professional training. And the board will know that this was highlighted as one of the key issues from Ockenden, that we must ensure that we have this multidisciplinary training. And our obstetricians are not where they should be, only 17%. Or 18% for prompt training and 17% for CTG training. And those of us who have been around a while will know that we've had several SIs where CTG training was an issue. So it is something that the team will need to work on. And the final thing from that report is about minimum safe staffing levels. The trajectory, or the target is 94%, and we are only achieving 87%, which is quite good. It's not that women are being put at risk, because what happens in those instances is that all of our midwives who don't do any, clinical on a day-to-day will come in and support the team.
Thank you very much indeed, Eileen. We'll have a full report on Kirkup at the new East Kent, at the next board meeting, won't we?
Yes, the plan is that we will bring a gap analysis and a report.
And I think, as you say, the challenge to the board, I mean, I hope that we are, as a board, we do ask ourselves the difficult questions, but it's really important that we never shy away from that. So any questions or comments to Arlene on any of what she's had to say? Anne?
I just wondered if the non-compliance with Safety Action 6 would have an impact on our refund from the clinical negligence scheme.
So the way the scheme works is that if you're not fully compliant, you don't get the 100% of whatever. I think we worked out yesterday it's about £1 million, but you do get some funding towards supporting improvement in the areas you identified that you didn't achieve. So what we don't know is how much that will be. Of course, it's far better to get the full funding.
Indeed it is. We always have in the past, haven't we? But we haven't really got time to have that conversation again. And or indeed for me to to demonstrate that I do have the sequence of letters right. Right, okay, can't see any other hands. So we're asked to note this report. And that enables us to move on to the Learning from Deaths report, which again went to Quality Committee. Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there was a good discussion of this in Quality Committee, so I didn't want to dwell on it in any very detailed way. One of the things I wanted to pick out, though, is that I think a good thing is that because this is a detailed report, it doesn't easily strike you. But we're doing a large number of structured judgment reviews. So we have criteria for patients whose deaths should trigger a structured judgment review to see if there's anything to learn from the care that was given. And the criteria are set out here. And of those patients who meet the criteria, we do structured judgment reviews in over 90% of them, which I think is very good. And the total number of structured judgment reviews we do here is more than what we do at St George's. I mean, they're not completely comparable systems, but I think there probably is some learning across the group from, and this is an example of good practice at ESTH. I think it's also helpful just to notice that although we're very, very careful about looking at deaths with people in different categories that are judged to be vulnerable, we get very few deaths of people with learning disabilities. We get more deaths of people with mental health problems, which probably isn't surprising because that's a more common situation. But I think this does give assurance that we're looking carefully at those. I'd say, and this doesn't particularly come out in the paper, but what I would say is that I think a lot of the value of those structured judgment reviews is in the individual instances in which the findings are fed back to the teams to reflect on in their own morbidity and mortality meetings. And we may want to strengthen that to try and show the board how we get the learning from that process. Because although maybe nobody was going to say this to me, if you actually look at the judgments we make about patients' care and the quality of care, which is in the table on page 6 in section 16, if you look at it, it looks reassuring that the quality of care doesn't seem to go down over time from quarter 1 2019 to 20. But you might argue that that's actually a bit surprising, considering that we went through the world's worst pandemic in the middle of all that, and you might think that we probably did get more difficult cases during the COVID pandemic. So I'm not sure. I think we should remember that structured judgment reviews are not a really sophisticated tool to understand mortality in the round, but they are helpful in picking up on details and learning from them. So when we do future iterations of the Learning from Deaths report, which I think should be the same from both sites in terms of their structure, we'll try and pick out some of that learning and show that to the board a bit more clearly.
Thank you, Richard. It is very striking, as you say, how many structured judgment reviews are done here against George's. And I personally find the average score really unhelpful because I'm more interested in knowing about what we're doing about the poor ones. Jacqueline, did you? Oh, no, sorry, I thought I saw you indicating. Anybody else got any other points? No? Okay, so if we could note that report, and that takes us on to the winter plan, which went to Finance Committee. James.
It did, and we had an extensive discussion there, which was supported by Alex as the Site Chief Operating Officer, so I'm not intending to repeat that discussion here. I think the key thing that I would highlight is, to be honest, we haven't really had a summer, so in a sense the winter plan is very much a continuation of a lot of the operational mitigations that we've got in place already for pressure. I do find it a little bit concerning that we've been in business continuity twice in the last month, Peter, in response to your earlier question, but equally it has allowed us to learn. It has allowed us to learn about some of the areas that we need to tighten up our management of flow internally, our escalation processes with partners, and it has also fed into some of the work further work that was explored at the workshop highlighted in the plan on the 14th of October. Which has produced a number of areas where we are continuing to develop our mitigations for the winter. The reality is a lot of our capacity is already open. A lot of what we would normally use as escalation is already open. We do have the additional mitigation at St Helier, as Chris highlighted, of a primary care-led ward, which we are working really closely with Sutton Health and Care and our GP Federation to bring on stream, starting from early December, which I think has a number of potential transformational and innovation benefits, as well as being a potential source of additional capacity at St Helier, which is currently the most pressured site. We also have additional capacity that is going into the community sector in Surrey, which I'm grateful to Thurza and her team for supporting in terms of accessing both the funding and the capacity for. But ultimately, a lot of our winter plan will be about our ability to be responsive and adaptable as a site team to the pressure that we face, to be able to escalate appropriately, to be able to make judgments across the hospital about how we balance risk, which is why we are revisiting the issue of boarding in line with some of the learning from other places such as North Bristol. And also to be able to articulate and hold our system partners to account for balancing risk inside the hospital and across all parts of the hospital, with risk being held outside the hospital in terms of patient flow as well. So I think that is the focus of the plan. I think there are a number of mitigations within it that will help us to have the best possible winter we can for our patients, most importantly, but also for our staff. But I'm sure that in the context of current operational performance, nobody here will be in any way led into believing that this is going to be easy or that we have the problem sort of fixed. I think this is a set of very practical mitigations and escalation measures that will help us in managing what I think will be a very difficult winter. Thank you.
Thank you, James. A really good summation at the end, I think, of the situation. Thurza.
I suppose just a couple of things. The board will have noted that community services are out of scope for this plan, and given the conversations that have been today and ongoing in terms of the role of community, whether it would be helpful for the board or the finance and performance group to actually see what's happening within the community as well as within the acute trust. And I think that's particularly important in context of the latest guidance that's come out, which is actually putting quite a lot of requirements on community services, particularly around care home admissions and ambulance conveyances. So that would be a suggestion. And then just in terms of clarification, in terms of the ward that's being opened on the St Helier site, it's under the umbrella of Sutton Health and Care as a partnership, but in terms of clinical accountability and responsibility, from a community services point of view, the only accountability and responsibility that we are taking is in the provision of therapy services to that ward, nothing more than that.
Yeah, and if I can just come back on that, just for clarity, the CQC registration for that ward and the clinical responsibility will sit with the primary care networks through the GP Federation.
Thank you, Thurza and James. That's really helpful clarification. But it reinforces for me a point I've made at successive boards, that I would like us to get how we cover community services at the board, organised in a way that reflects better on what you do, Thurza. I think it gets squeezed out too often, but you and I have had that conversation before. Derek.
I don't have a very clear question for you, James, for which I apologise, but I do worry about boarding. I mean, I know this has come into practice in other trusts, and but it very much concerns me from a safety point of view, from a staff morale point of view, from a patient welfare point of view. I mean, I know it's a bad solution to a very bad problem, but you've said, in terms of the process for taking this forward, you're going to have a task and finish group, but who will that report to, and how will we monitor the impact of boarding on staff morale, on patient well-being, on outcomes and so on?
So, I mean, I think Arlene will probably want to come in on this as well. I think from my perspective, we are looking to co-produce our approach to this. We're very closely with our operational and nursing teams, particularly those who are responsible for the wards. And I think it helps that we have a division that has both ED and many of our medical wards in it, because they have an understanding of how to balance risk. The approach that we are looking to take, although it's not fully finalised,
is to look to board out medically optimised patients who are set to go home on the day. So these are basically people who are no longer unwell. If possible, we will move them to a discharge lounge in order to do it, and that will then allow improved flow of more acutely unwell people out of ED and up into the wards where they need to be in order for some of their onward care to be initiated and for them to be in the right environment. So it's very much about balancing risk. We're not looking at an approach where we are attempting to board out acutely unwell people who've just been admitted. It's actually about trying to anticipate the flow out of the hospital, bring that forward earlier on in the day, and use space to do that, so that the wards can get on with seeing the more unwell people. And in implementing that policy, we'll very much be looking to build on the learning from North Bristol and its implementation at St George's, which was the challenge that Jacqueline put to us earlier, but also to make sure that we are continuing to have oversight of, continuing to respond to staff feedback and also monitor incidents, complaints, etc., to make sure that we understand the impact we're having. I mean, this is not a policy that we would, say should be an optimal thing to do, but as a way of escalating into a practical mitigation of risk. I think it is important that it's something that we explore, because otherwise the concern is that we just continue to load all of that risk into our emergency department.
And as we saw graphically today, the effect of that on ED cannot be underestimated, and therefore the safety of patients. Back to the conversation we had earlier. Arlene, did you want to come in on this?
No. Can I just come back? Maybe the key thing here is that we understand, and maybe as Ned, I don't fully understand what's meant by boarding and what's not meant. And I'm not suggesting you answer that question now, but in working out the ESTH model of boarding, maybe the assurance we're looking for is that that we know what it means and we know what it doesn't mean. So in future papers that we see that.
Well, I mean, I think that obviously we haven't finally agreed what we're going to do yet.
No.
But
when you get there.
When we get there, and when we've finalised our approach, I'm very happy that we bring it back to the Quality Committee and articulate exactly what we are doing.
I think we just need to be clear that it's not boarding in the same way as it was. The Bristol model is far more is different, a bit different to that. It is about how we spread risk without in a different way. But I think that's the bit. It's a good conversation to have, probably just not here. So when we get to that, and when we've done some learning from George's, I think that's the time to sort of think about how we can, because it's not easy to do either,
So I think it's an issue for Quality Committee to assure the board, but you're quite right to ask the questions, Derek. I think a lot of us feel uneasy. Arlene, was there anything you wanted to add? Because I know Richard wants to come in.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Derek, I don't think it's definitely not boarding as we knew it before, because that would fill me with dread. It's not, it's not boarding like, yes, exactly. It is a lot more measured and a lot more planned, and not just, we'll bring you on 2 extra patients because we have too many downstairs. So I think that, the detail will follow, but it's not the boarding that we know, because I wouldn't sign up to that either.
You most certainly wouldn't, Arlene, even if anyone else would. Richard?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, as a hospital physician, my instincts would be similar to Derek's, but I think James and Arlene have addressed that. But I just wanted to play back where the national conversation is around this, and what we're being pressed on and reminded of, I think quite properly, is that the amount of risk a patient, one individual person is subjected to on the whole length of their journey is grossly unevenly distributed. And the biggest risk may be when a person develops crushing central chest pain at home and dials 999 for an ambulance, and the ambulance isn't there because it's stuck outside the ED, and the patient runs the risk of dying or loses heart muscle and can't get to their angiogram on time. And so we have different bits of the journey which are extremely safe or extremely unsafe, and we're just being asked to reflect on that and even things out a bit and improve the overall picture.
I have to say, however difficult, I think it's absolutely the right. And we were having the conversations before, weren't we, actually, Richard, about spreading risk. Peter?
Thank you. Just to come back to the winter plan, which I think is excellent, robust, and it's great to hear the degree of planning that's gone on. I think I'd just kind of welcome a sense of the extent to what the margin you're working with in between, if the plan's working, or what would tip things back into business continuity issues? And what are the factors that may do that? If we're no longer as concerned about COVID, for example, is it flu? Or what are the factors, and are there any early warning indicators that would enable us to respond?
So fundamentally, what tips us into BCI is the ability to safely accommodate. So ultimately, what tips us there is the ability to safely accommodate new critically unwell people coming in through the front door of either or both EDs. So that is the thing that would raise our OPAL level and tip us there. And there's a number of in the winter plan we talk about different OPAL levels and different triggers, but that is the main one. The early warning indicator, and the bit that I think we are improving our visibility on, but have some way to go, is that we know that a 10% reduction in discharges over subsequent days increases the time in ED by 40% for admitted patients. When the time for admitted patients increases by that amount, that is the thing that's going to back up the front door. So we know that our canary in the coal mine, so to speak, is low discharges. So what we are focusing on as a site team is saying, if we see at St Helier, we know that we need at least 40 a day to keep ourselves upright. If that starts to drop into the high 30s and it does it for one day, that's okay. If it does it for two, it's cause for concern. If it does it for three, that's the thing that we need to be focusing on, because we know after that continues from not much longer, we will start to have a real crisis at the front door. We see it slowly building. It rarely happens spontaneously that we just have a really high take. It builds over a number of days. So the trick for us is all about that flow, all about that discharge, and all about that continual escalation internally and with partners. And what we know from BCI is that when we do that additional level of escalation, we do get higher numbers of discharge. So my challenge to the system and my team is, why can't we do the actions that we do in BCI as BAU? That being said, some of those are a special effort. They are people setting down the day job and coming in and doing something different. So there's a balance, isn't there? Because you still need to have another gear you can reach to, and we can't just normalise what are people stepping outside of their normal duties to do something different. What we need to do is find the bits that we can learn about and embed in our normal practice. And I think that's a continual job. And I think part of what is really difficult, both in leadership roles and operational and clinical roles within the organisation, is that you can't ever drop your guard. So you have to be on top of it every single day, and there's no respite from it. And I think that is, where we will be, and I think it's where every NHS trust will be really all winter.
Thank you, James. We really do need to move on. Can I ask you to note the winter plan, please? Thank you, colleagues. The next item, again, two items that have been to committees. 3.1 is the workforce race equality standard and the workforce disability equality standard. Paul.
Okay, thank you. So this has been extensively discussed, so I won't go into too much detail. At a very high level, RES seems to be improving overall. Still not where we want to be, but improving. Disability, quite a bit of a way to go. In terms of disability, probably the main thing we need to focus upon is actually the self-declaration piece, because it's quite difficult to get a really good sense of what's happening when you've only got 4% of people who've self-declared. So that's certainly going to be one of the main priorities for this year. I will stop there and I'll take questions just because I'm conscious of time.
Thank you, Paul. I'm very grateful for that. And you very kindly made sure that these reports were circulated before People Committee to everybody, so that everybody had the opportunity and they could attend People Committee if they wanted. But they're very important documents, and ideally we would have wanted them here. Any points that people wanted to raise? Martin?
Yeah, I will be very brief, and it's not a question. I think that what can happen in these documents is we've seen similar figures for some years and their numbers, but if you take a step back from it, actually the biggest issue for the disability isn't the reporting. It's the fact that the data says that if you are a non-disabled person applying for a job, you're twice as likely to get it as a disabled person. If you're a disabled person that we employ, you're 5 times more likely to enter capability disciplinary, and I don't think those are acceptable.
Thank you, Martin. I'll call on Paul. Can I just say, though, that actually declaration is also incredibly important. Otherwise, we're just dealing with, we don't really know what we're dealing with, do we? We know that there are far more staff with a disability than are declaring, and we need to enable them to feel confident to declare.
But it would make those numbers worse. So the point still stands.
Indeed. Paul?
I mean, the issue we've got in the sense is we don't know, so the absolute number is really small. And so just to give an example of the example you raised there, Martin, about people entering into performance, the actual underlying number are about five people. It's really, really small numbers of people that were involved. And so there's quite a distorting impact. We know from sort of national sort of trends that actually the prevalence of disability is like 15% in the national population. Depends how you count it, but it's certainly much higher than 4%. And our difficulty is we are dealing with real distortions in absolute numbers.
Okay, I didn't want to get into debate, but the numbers aren't small for recruitment. So you're twice as likely to not get the job if you've got a disability, and those aren't small numbers.
I think it all illustrates how much we've got to go as an organisation, like many NHS like many organisations actually, in relation to disability. I think we have made progress in relation to race equality, and we need to acknowledge that and celebrate it whilst recognising how far we've got to go. I mean, I think Martin and I are both very open. We've both got a declared disability, so it's something we both feel really, really strongly about. And have tried to give help give leadership to the organisation about it. We need to make the experience of our staff with disability much easier. A lot of them have a poor experience, but we've done some good things that we need to celebrate, and I'd like to get more coverage, for example, of the Calibre programme, which is a brilliant piece of joint working between George's and ESTH and Imperial, actually. But we're talking really small numbers again. So, Jacqueline.
So I think we need to, for me, some of you have heard me say this, the improving the experience of staff with disability is by far, in terms of all of the protected characteristics, the one where I believe that we need to, and I am absolutely clear we need to make more progress. I think Paul's right. We need to make sure we collect the data. You often can't see disabilities. I wouldn't know you had a disability.
Except I go on about it.
Apart from you go on about it. But we do really make, and the other bit is that bit about how safe it feels to do that. And then when you also, I often get involved in staff coming to me because local managers are refusing to spend money to adapt the environment for them to work in. So there's something about what we need to do with that, and then some of that I think will help them get, what is it we can do that helps people tell us what about the disability and enable us to help it, and it be seen in the same way that we work with staff in regards to ethnicity, because at the minute it feels unbalanced, and I think we really need to make sure it is balanced and the thing that we do this year. Completely. And any help and support we can get to do that. And things that we've learned from improvements in our experience of staff from a BME background that we can apply to this, or wherever others have done better, I think we need to do, because it feels a bit like one of the lost causes, and we need to not let it be.
Which is one of the reasons I keep going on about it, my own situation, not because I want to make a big thing of it, but I want to enable other people to be open about their situation, and Martin's exactly the same.
Paul? Just very quickly, the other benefit of trying to focus on self-declaration is what I'd like us to do is to write out to everybody to get details about if they're willing to declare various demographics. But what it gives us the opportunity to do is to ask about, do you need a reasonable adjustment? And so it's a very individual, practical level. We're not just capturing the data. What we're doing is we're capturing data, and we're saying at the same time, if you consider yourself to have a disability, do you require a reasonable adjustment? And that gives us an opportunity to have a conversation. So it's not it may feel slightly academic, it's not. I think if we do this properly, it could have a really positive impact, but it does require quite a bit of resource and time and focus.
Could I just
Of course,
very,
Martin.
very quickly just say one small practical thing which would help is to not charge the cost of these adjustments to the local budget. There's a huge amount of tension and potential for discrimination because it can be a relatively high proportion of a small budget. Organisations that I work with that have improved this have always budgeted those costs centrally.
And I agree with Martin, and I made that point at George's yesterday, and we agreed to take it away there, so we will do the same here. So I think we need to acknowledge that these plans are in a much better state than they were a year ago, and I think we need to thank the staff who've worked so hard on that. I still think there's some way to go, but they've made an enormous, they've been improved enormously, and I'd like you to thank the staff who've done that. And hope that when we look at these next year, first of all, the board will be able to sign them off, which I think is properly a board responsibility, and that we will see that our efforts, particularly around disability, have had some success. So I think that's the kind of challenge we should set ourselves, really. But all the board is actually asked to do, because they were approved by the People Committee in Common, is to note the reports and action plans. So if colleagues are happy to do that, I will move on to item 3.2, which is nursing validation. Ali.
Thank you, Gillian. This is just a short report on nursing revalidation. Similar to our medical colleagues, nurses and AHPs, nurses, midwives and AHPs are required to revalidate and to have a PIN number. And the report outlines provides assurance that we do have a process for checking those PIN numbers, and also that we have checked with George's. We're working together with George's to ensure that we align the process. In the process of pulling the paper together, we realized that there were some clear actions that needed to happen, and we've started those actions. There are only 3 members of staff in Epsom St Helier who haven't revalidated and therefore don't have active PIN numbers, but they're not working. So we will continue to update this report and maybe just to bring at least quarterly updates. I think we had a discussion yesterday at George's board about nurses who have been have processes going on with NMC or AHPs for that matter, and we will ensure that we bring that as well, because the numbers aren't huge, which is good, because we wouldn't want huge numbers, but there are some nurses that are in a process with the NMC in particular, and we will ensure that we update the board on those.
Thank you very much indeed, Arlene, and I think the report's very much welcomed. It's very clear. Thank you very much. Jacqueline.
Oh, I didn't turn my thing off the first time. So I think it's right to have parity in some way with when we have doctors in trouble as well. But I also know with the NMC, and it seems more than we get with the GMC, we often get patients referring nurses there. And I've been in a situation where the chief nurse has been referred, even though it wasn't appropriate, but they still investigate it. Of course they should, but I just don't want that to become. It's different. It's different. There's one thing about being in a process. There's one thing about the reasons why and what the outcome is, and I don't want either to preempt or prejudge some of that either. If that makes sense, Arlene.
No, I think it does. I think the NMC have moved on a bit from that, where everything puts somebody into a process. They're much more work with the organisation. So if I was referred to the NMC, for instance, they'd probably come talk to you, Jacqueline, first. They would do that groundwork before they made a decision as to whether an investigation would happen. So anytime it's going into a formal investigation, they've done that pre-work before, where before it was just, if you were referred, you were investigated.
We probably need to just take this out of here, because otherwise you and I might be having a debate.
Yes,
but yes,
because
it took 2.5 years.
Yeah, no,
It may be, so yes, please do take it offline. It may be that the rules have improved somewhat. I think that's what Arlene was saying. Anyway, right now we're being asked to receive the paper for assurance and to make any necessary recommendations. I don't think we've got any recommendations to make. I think we are assured. I think it was a very helpful paper. And Jacqueline and Arlene will have a conversation offline. Everyone happy to support that? Lovely, thank you very much indeed. And thank goodness we've caught up on time, so I can begin to relax a bit instead of feeling highly anxious. We're on to item 4.1 and the finance report. Andrew.
Yeah. As has been said by several people, there was a detailed discussion on this in the Finance Committee, and we will be talking about it again in part 2. But in terms of feedback here, you know, we always knew this was a challenging plan for this year, and to get back to the target of a break-even position was always going to be exceedingly difficult. I think we're beginning to see the consequence of that because we are adverse to our plan, despite the fact, you know, we already reported this would be a more challenging first half of the year in the sense of reporting a deficit across that period. So our actual deficit is higher than our planned deficit. Some of that is a consequence of the elective recovery fund income adjustments in terms of the way that's being managed within London, but some is to do with shortfalls, particularly against CIPs. And I think it's worth calling out that the pressures we experience in balancing the overall plan, together with the pressures we're now seeing in delivering against the CIPs, are in part, you know, a consequence of the wider pressures we are seeing in the system. So the activity pressures that James mentioned earlier, etc., etc. So these things are linked in the sense of how they fit together. For brevity's sake, I won't go through the rest of the paper, but I'll pass back to Gillian and questions.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed, Andrew. So any questions from colleagues? No? So we're asked, we've had a bit of it, I suppose, in Anne's report, and we'll have more later. So we're asked to note that report. So thank you, colleagues. So that takes us on to item, the section on strategy governance, and item 5.1 is the corporate risk register. Stephen.
Thanks, Gillian. I'll be fairly brief on this. So this report gives an overview of the key changes to the corporate risk register since the corporate risk register was last considered by the board at its meeting in July. So a couple of things to highlight. So currently 32 risks on the Trust Corporate Risk Register, 2 of which are overseen by the Quality Committee, 6 by the People, 15 by the Finance Committee, 8 by Estates Assurance, and 1 by the BYFH Programme Board. So that's how the individual risks are overseen. In terms of the key changes since the last time the board reviewed the corporate risk register, a few changes. So the risk in relation to disclosure and borrowing service was at that time risk rated as 16 in light of the number of staff that still needed to have a DBS in place. That's reduced significantly now. Paul may want to say something, but essentially the level of progress made in relation to that means that the People Committee felt comfortable in reducing that risk score down to an 8 on the basis of the lower likelihood. The Quality Committee agreed at this meeting in August to reduce the IPC, specifically CDIF and MRSA risk from a 16 to an 8, and also close the COVID-19 bed spaces risk in light of changes to national guidance. The other thing probably to highlight is that both the Quality Committee and the People Committee have been doing some detailed work looking at the risks within their areas. They both considered some draft new risks in terms of the risk profile in relation to both, because probably on both, but specifically on the Quality Committee, the number of risks falling within the remit of the Quality Committee felt a bit low given the size and complexity of the work that the Trust does, and so the Quality Committee reviewed potential risks coming through, which it will look at in detail in this meeting in a couple of weeks' time. So that was probably all I was going to say, really, Gillian.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for emphasising that point about Quality Committee. It does seem odd, doesn't it, that we've got so few and so many in other committees. Anyway, comments or questions from colleagues? No? So we're asked to note the risks de-escalated, note the updates to the control environment, and the roles of the committees in relation to risks currently on the register. People happy to support that? Lovely, thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 5.2 and corporate objectives, and this is James Marsh. James.
Thank you, Gillian. And again, I can be relatively brief on this. We had a useful discussion at our board development seminar at the start of October to review our approach to our corporate objectives for the second half of this year. The context is that we haven't updated our corporate objectives for over a year, as it's timely that we take a step back and look at what our objectives should be. An important part of the context that drives the recommendation is that we are quite a long way through the process of developing our new strategy. We hope to have board signed off strategy by the end of this financial year, and that will drive a fundamental review of our corporate objectives moving forward for the start of the next financial year. A number of things have changed since Epsom St Helier signed off their corporate objectives, and they're listed in the paper, but clearly our financial position is very much in the spotlight. We have formally formed the group with St George's, and we have in stark relief some of the ongoing challenges as a result of the COVID pandemic in urgent and emergency care flows, elective care and cancer pathways. So on the back of that, we came to the conclusion that we should review the existing corporate objectives, see how aligned they are to our current state, and we recommend 3 minor changes that are documented in the paper. The first, under the section of the proposals to build the new specialist emergency care hospital, is a recognition that we had previously had an ambition to develop the full business case through the course of this year, but in light of the ongoing work and the need for clarity from the national team, that recommendation has been altered to indicate that we should continue the progress and work actively with our regulators to progress the business case. Under the section on collaboration, there's an amendment just to actively acknowledge that we are now formally part of a group, and that we should maximise the opportunities of us collaborating within the group. And then finally, under the last column, I think we actively recognise that we need to make some step change transformationally in order to get the best use of our resources, and the proposed change of this objective is in line with what the St George's board also signed off yesterday.
Thank you very much indeed, James. I think really clear paper. Thank you for that. Martin.
Yeah, I thought it was an excellent piece of work. No mention of health inequalities?
I think we are exploring health inequalities as part of our strategy development. It is clear from discussions that we've had in board seminars that we would need to have an increased focus on health inequalities, and I have absolutely no doubt that it will form a prominent part of our strategy and then drive forward the corporate objectives from April onwards.
Thank you. I mean, just on that matter, which is really important, but the integrated care system, stroke partnership, stroke board, one of their key areas is reducing health inequalities. So I guess anything we should do should actually be part as in partnership with what are priorities across the integrated care system.
So absolutely, and agree, and as part of the strategy development, we are linking in actively with both Surrey Heartlands and South West London to help contribute to the strategy development that is occurring there, recognising that a fundamental role for the ICSs are to address health inequalities, and then we need to make sure that our own strategy is aligned appropriately with their proposals.
Can't see any other hands. Thank you for those points. Can I ask the board to agree the proposed objectives now, just for a short period of time, really, James, but nevertheless a good piece of work. Thank you for that. Everyone happy? Yeah, great. So that takes us on to 5.3 in the Horizon Scanning report. Stephen.
Thanks, Gillian, and again, can be quite quick on this one because the paper's only for noting, but just to say this is the first time this report has come to the board. And just to say on the purpose of it, obviously the three roles of the board are around setting strategy, ensuring accountability, promoting and shaping a healthy culture for the organisation, but sort of underpinned by that broader context within which the trust is working and the key external developments. And so that's the purpose of this. That's the purpose of this report, to give that sort of broader context. I won't go through the key details. There's a lot there that flows out of the Health and Care Act passing earlier this year. And I think probably the main sort of reflection as you look at some of the developments in the system is around sort of both the scale of the changes, but also, you know, some of the greater certainty in terms of the publication of the new operating framework by NHS England, which Jacqueline referenced earlier, the new enforcement guidance consultation that's come out, the new transactions guidance that's now in place. So both a bit of a combination of both the scale of change, but also the increasing certainty around sort of actually how does the new system work in practice. I think a couple of other things to pick out. The review of leadership in the NHS by Messenger earlier this year, published in June. The government accepted the 7 recommendations. We're awaiting how they will be implemented in practice. And just a quick one on the CQC State of Care report. I think it'll look very familiar to people around the table, but it's nonetheless quite stark in its assessment, talking about gridlock in the system, highlighting the continued access problems, challenges around inequalities, workforce challenges across the country, and then the specific challenges in relation to maternity services across the country.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. So George's colleagues are used to seeing this report, and we've always found it very helpful. So I hope colleagues here will feel the same way. Peter.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the report. 2 quick points. One is, I mean, there were some indications under the last Prime Minister that whether it was a white paper on health inequality had been dropped just because they thought it was in the kind of nanny state mode. I don't know whether under the new regime we've had any indication yet whether that will be resurrected. It ties back to the last discussion. It's helpful to have a clear line of sight from the national to the regional to the local, etc. And I just wondered whether we had any indication. I think it would be regrettable if that opportunity was missed at the national level, but it's just and the second is some indication of a move back to payments by results if we're Horizon Scanning, which I know there's a history to that and whether or not if we're Horizon Scanning, that is something we would need to prepare for, or the issues there that would we'd have to respond to at some point. But anyway, just two points. Thank you.
So, as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been any specific new clarity with the new Secretary of State around the issue of inequalities. Having said that, you know, obviously inequalities has a big dimension in the long-term plan. I'd be very surprised if it didn't continue to be a focus going forward. So I think we'll wait to see what the new Secretary of State might say on this, but I would be surprised if the focus came off it in some ways. And certainly we as a trust will want to continue to focus on the inequality issue.
Thank you, Stephen. Andrew, were you going to speak about it?
No.
Let Jacqueline.
So we might have a different view, but
I think we're all in the same place. We've had this debate before.
we don't. We really, and I've said this to various senior people in the Department of Health. Going back to PBR will be a step backwards. It will drive different bits of deficits in systems. I think it's better we try and have it as one. Try and have one system in terms of the money. And I also think it will drive the wrong behaviours in terms of collaboration rather than competition, or competition rather than collaboration. So I have asked many or several officials in the NHS not to, but there is some body of view in the national NHSE team that actually think that going back there will help drive efficiency. And I don't think really, even with the ERF fund, that's not the indicator for driving efficiency. That doesn't really help. It just becomes in my view, we put a lot of infrastructure into the NHS to actually manage PBR, and it costs a lot of money to manage it. I don't know what you think.
So I think there's a nuance, isn't there, though, about sort of at the edges where it might be useful?
To Jacqueline's final point, there was a massive admin overhead from running EPR. It ran into, when they were asking us to unwind it, we were being quoted billions in terms of that. So, and some of that is still in place. So stuff around, collecting SUS data and flex and freeze, is still largely in place. I think there's a nuance that we probably need to think through, to Gillian's point, which is, while to go back to the competitive side of it would be counterproductive, but I think we do need to recognise, and there are swings and roundabouts in this, PBR allows you to get paid for the work you do. So if you're doing more, you will get more money. Granted, we also need to be conscious if you do less, you will get less money. But also the most important point probably is that also all depends on where you set the price. And so we could say PBR could be a panacea for all ills, but if they set the price in the wrong place, it may not actually solve the problem, because I don't think PBR in itself doesn't bring more money. So the overall envelope is still fixed. So that would argue if you want to make PBR work in the current environment, you would have to be quite challenging on price, given some of the activity pressures we're experiencing. So I think, as Gillian says, it's nuanced, but we might want to influence that. There may be some nuanced methods around how within systems do you reflect the overall allocation to a system while still encouraging and fostering collaboration within that system. So, if there are activity pressures on a system, it sees its funding get flexed. So we might want to try and nuance that, but it's a difficult one.
I think we had a discussion at board development, actually. It must have been when you were away, Peter, because I remember James getting quite impassioned in response to something that Stephen Collier had said, and I thought it was really interesting debate, because it broadly supported what Jacqueline was saying, but just at the edges it could be quite helpful. Am I summarising you adequately, James?
I think my reflection on what we've lost is the ability to have a really transparent mechanism of flowing investment through to services based on patterns of activity. So when we get into 23-24 business planning, what you will see is we have this single monolithic sum of money which is agreed with the system. We will hopefully try and make some cases where we've seen some real shifts in activity or the cost of delivering our service that we increase that sum of money, but then we will have this massive groundswell upwards of requests from services to fund investment in either volumes or quality or other service developments. And national standards being dropped into us that increase the cost of providing a service but are now de-linked from any source of funding. So whilst I think that we don't want to go back to the red in tooth and claw days of a competitive PBR system, I think the challenge for the system is to understand how we now manage service development, service growth and investment in quality in a post-PBR environment. And I actually think as a trust board, it loads a huge responsibility on us to manage that process of prioritising between services when we just have this single sum of money. And so I suppose that is the bit that, I'm personally very supportive of all the arguments for not having that full PBR system because of the transactional costs, but it does make me anxious about how we manage that process.
Thank you. Very interesting, but I'm going to call it to a halt. No, not your fault, Peter. You asked a question and then you got a much fuller debate than probably than you expected. So Robert has arrived for the staff patient story. I'm conscious he's on clinical duties today, so I'm going to bring the item forward and then we will go back to item 6. So welcome. Would you like to sit down and next to a machine, or so? What do you want to do?
Where would you like me? Is there a video or anything like that?
I think it's better if you're able to speak into a mic, if only because I'm rather deaf, Robert. And I'd like you to feel part of the meeting rather than...
Yes.
And so a warm welcome again. You and I spent some time together this morning in ED, and I'm very conscious that that is where you're meant to be. But I'm delighted that you are able to join us to take us through this particular patient story. And you might just like to tell colleagues who you are and what you do.
Thank you. So, thanks for inviting me. My name is Rob Town, one of the consultants in the emergency department, and I'm the clinical director for the service. Amir Hassan gives his apologies that he can't be here. He volunteered me for this, and for that I'm very grateful. So I think the reason why he felt this was a good case to present is because often complaints are difficult and they can be very stressful for the staff. And when we get a complaint that we can actually learn something from and illustrate how we as a department and as a team learn from things that go wrong and how we can embed good practice, I think he felt this was a good example. So if it's okay, things have got a bit busier since when you were in the department, so I will just start. So he's named it the Deadly Mango, and it's he really is a 57-year-old lady who presented to the ED here at Epsom with difficulty swallowing, having eaten a mango pickle, and that's the soft stuff you put with your naan bread, that sort of stuff. And she felt a sensation of a foreign body in her throat. She was seen by the locum registrar doctor, who felt actually the patient was not too bad, able to swallow, not drooling, no particular red flag features, nothing visible. So she was discharged with the advice that if she was getting worse, she should come back. She presented 4 days later, more unwell. It wasn't yet obvious what was the problem. She was struggling at this stage with her swallowing. Still nothing obviously visible in the back of the throat. Given antibiotics, and actually the medical team looked after her. She presented halfway through the night, and ENT gave some advice in the morning. A CT was done which showed, unfortunately, she'd had a whole perforation from, at this point, they didn't know what, and air was in her chest where it shouldn't be. She was discussed with cardiothoracics at St George's and then with the surgeons at Guildford, who did take the patient. She stayed for a week with IV antibiotics, and eventually a mango seed sliver was removed from her esophagus, and that was the offending thing which had caused the perforation. So it's very unusual. She'd made a full recovery, which is great, but did make a complaint against the trust, which is understandable. And the questions, so Amir leads us for complaints, and in how we deal with them, the questions he felt were, was the assessment initially done by the locum registrar correct and reasonable? Was the discharge information given to her on that first visit reasonable? Did we follow any available guidelines? And what can we do to learn as a team to prevent this from happening next time? So in terms of the investigation, he got information from the locum registrar and concluded that their assessment was pretty spot on and not many things were missed. There was a low level of risk because it was felt to be a soft food. It's very different if a patient presents, for example, having eaten a fish dish or sharp chicken bones. So I think your suspicion of injury changes depending on what you think has been eaten. We also got information from one of the ENT consultants in the trust. And again, I think it comes down to your suspicion of injury based on what you think someone's eaten. And it was felt to be very rare to have a sharp foreign body injury following soft food. The ENT service felt that the assessment was done appropriately, correctly, but probably should have been discussed with ENT given her symptoms. They probably would have discharged her home at that point, and would have advised her to reattend the ED within 24 hours if there wasn't an improvement. So a slight change there. It is worth noting that there's no national trust guideline for this type of presentation. So in terms of what we've done, I think Amir felt it was a good example because we've since drawn up a guideline in conjunction with the ENT team, and that's passed, it's being signed off and it's just being added to our intranet page. And it's not for the people, it's not for patients who've eaten something sharp, but for patients who have the symptoms of something that may have been sharp. So hopefully, you want to try and prevent this from happening again. We've also created a very clear discharge leaflet to give to patients should they present with the sensation of pain after they've eaten something. And I think for us as a team, the thing that we struggle with is we have a very high turnover of staff, both nursing, admin, and clinicians, and it's how to embed lessons and to create a sort of organizational memory so that hopefully the next junior clinician that sees a patient in 5 months' time might benefit from this case and the learning. So just in terms of highlighting what we do routinely, but in particular with this case. So this case was discussed at our 2-monthly quality meeting and morbidity and mortality meeting, and there are some learning notes sent out on email and WhatsApp after each of those meetings, and all the juniors are invited to attend. Teaching-wise, Amir actually delivers a learning from complaints session and a quarterly update on complaints for the new starters. The guideline and patient information leaflet gets shared out. We have a WhatsApp teaching group and a monthly ED newsletter. And it's all just sort of people, I guess, they read different formats, different media. Some would prefer email, some would prefer WhatsApp. So we've tried to use the shotgun approach and make sure that you try and access as many people as possible. And we've also got a continually reworked induction presentation called Safety in ED, where if we feel that there's a number of misses, a number of SIs, a number of complaints following a theme or a pattern, then we want the new starters to benefit from the learning. And we've also included it in our mandatory training for all clinicians so that everyone can benefit from the learning. So I think hopefully it's a good illustration of how this case shows that we try to learn from a team. Mistakes will still happen, but as long as we are trying our best to prevent them from recurring, I think.
Thank you so much, Robert. I think it just shows the complexity of what you do down there. I mean, who would have expected a Mango to do this? Certainly not me. I think there might be a couple of questions. I know you're absolutely
No, that's fine.
Run off your feet,
That's fine.
but if you don't mind, since we've got you here. So, Martin?
Yeah, so I am a layman, okay, so it may be a completely stupid question, and it was fascinating what you said. I just wondered, you said the assessment was okay, but is there a risk of concentrating too much on the type of food? Isn't it possible with any type of food that it's contaminated with a lump of plastic or glass?
You're right. So I think it's a learning point for us that you shouldn't focus entirely on the food, but I think it is understandable when someone tells you they've just had, for example, I don't know if she did say this, I just had a papadom or a naan with some mango pickle. You could sort of understand why the person seeing wouldn't be thinking the same sort of injuries as, oh, I've just had a fish dinner and felt something poke through. But it's a learning point, and that's why on the guideline it doesn't specify the type of food eaten, but the symptoms that you've displayed after that. So hopefully we'd catch it through that guideline.
Richard? And then Chris?
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you very much. Thank you for coming. And one of the great things about this story, I think, is that you've taken something which is ridiculously obscure and exotic. I hope the patient, if they're listening, wouldn't mind me saying that. And patients quite like to be exotic. But you've taken something that's probably never going to happen again, but from it you've derived a safety learning point in the form of this flowchart, which is really pragmatic and useful, I think. And I think when we share patient safety stories, sometimes the best stories are those which are eye-catching and interesting, so people take time out of their busy days to look at them, but they have a moral that's much more broadly applicable, and I think you've done that beautifully. I was also very happy, having felt anxious reading the title, to find that it was a potentially deadly mango.
Yes, true.
So there's a happy ending,
Yes.
which is really good.
Blame
Thank
Amir
you
for
very
the
much.
Theatrics.
Thank you, Richard. Chris?
Thank you very much. I think it shows an incredibly mature attitude by the department to have taken this so seriously and have done all this work. It is really difficult getting learning across anywhere in the NHS when staff turnover, but particularly in A&E. I did wonder, this is from a clinical point of view, I guess, as to why this was an ENT matter and not a gastroenterological matter, given that it ended up as an esophageal perforation. But maybe that's Chair would think that's a degree of
Oh, no,
technical...
I'm terribly interested in the answer, actually. While we've got Robert here,
No,
we might as well maximise the benefit.
It's a question that's spot on, and I asked Amir that in the days leading up to this as I prepared for this, and I think if it's an obvious above the glottis problem, then that's sort of an ENT issue, and if it's below, it's classically a gastro issue. And I think if there's no other clear things going on, it's just a swallowing problem, a swallowing difficulty, then it comes down to sometimes what availability do you have at that site at that time. And so it may be that someone felt, let's start with the ENT, we know that so-and-so is on, we know the time of day, and ultimately what they really needed was that scan. And once you've got the scan, you've got exactly the problem, and you can go from there. But so I think whether you troubled ENT or the gastro service initially, ENT is normally our go-to for a swallowing problem. But in this case, it was a swallowing problem that led to an infection within the chest.
Thank you. James. And then Paul, did you indicate? Or?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Well, James and then Paul.
Hi, Rob.
Then I think
Hello.
we might need to let you go.
Yeah.
It's more of a general comment and just a reminder for us all to take a step back when we are just looking at productivity. In my past life, I had the pleasure of looking at job plans, and I remember having challenges with your clinical director about the relative proportion of time that is direct clinical care and the proportion of time in the job plans that relate to supporting professional activity. And it highlights the importance of us taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture, and that if we just always focus on delivery of patient care, we will not be a learning organisation. The quality of care will reduce, the training environment will get worse. So that there's a balance there somewhere, and it's good to hear that you're putting it to good use. And it's also good to hear that the trainee experience in the emergency department has definitely improved over the past 3 to 4 years.
Thank you for noting that. Yeah, agreed completely.
Just a quick one. You talked about learning from complaints training, which I think is really good. Interested to know how that goes down. But also, do you do learning from compliments and almost that piece as well?
I think you're absolutely right. I think in times of stress and hardship, as it is currently, a small compliment goes a long way, and we do celebrate that as best we can. We have the friends and family feedback, which is something that gets sent to us every month, but we also have our own sort of internal perform form, so which we feedback good practice, and that could be, admin, nursing, clinical, and that's pretty well received, and it's good for the staff to reflect on what they're doing well, because otherwise it's a bit soul destroying if every time you get contact with someone senior it's always about something wrong that you've done.
So just to say, if board members don't have it, I can make sure that everyone does. We have a monthly corporate gratitude report, which is where we collate all of our compliments, and they are pulled together. We identify and thank the staff, and that's circulated to all managers and also to the staff who have been the subject of a compliment. And actually, I can say that our ED departments are frequently at the top of the list for the most number of compliments that are received. Yeah.
It'd be good to see that on a might help.
So this is generating a lot of interest, as you could see, because I've also got Richard who'd like to come back, and Arlene, and then I think we do probably need to let you go, Robert.
Thank you.
It's a very quick thought, which is that a perforated esophagus and mediastinitis is no joke, and people can easily die of that. And so one way of telling this story would be that ED missed a mango injury. Another way is to say that ED quite possibly saved this lady's life.
I'll let you be the judge of that. Thank you.
No, I just wanted to add to James's point of the monthly gratitude report. It was one of the best parts of my role when I was chief nurse for Epsom St Helier, because you get to sign individual letters to every member of staff who's had more than 3 compliments that comes through the organisation, and ED gets loads, consultants, Clark Ward, Clark, everybody. But I used to, so I think before me they used to do an electronic signature, but I like to sign every single one of them because I then got to read them. and they go to people. And actually, I had a consultant contact me recently because they'd lost the copy that I signed, say, could I sign a copy for them so that they have it. So I think it is, we do ensure that they get that as well.
Well, that's a lovely story. A final point from me, Chair's prerogative, Robert. Did we get back to the complainant, and how did she feel about what we'd done and learnt from the incident?
I can partly answer that. I've seen the response from us to the complainant, and in it we sort of apologised for the delay because it was fairly complex. We had to talk to ENT, etc. But I haven't got a feel for how the patient feels about what we've done since. But I can ask Amir.
It would have just been interesting, but
Yes.
there's more pressing matters. So, well, I think the board would like to compliment you and the team for doing all this work, for thinking about the learning, and for being prepared to come and talk to us today. We really appreciate it, especially when I know just how much you've got on. So, thank you very much again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. What's Amir giving you this?
He did something for me, so...
Thanks again. Cheerio. Bye. Right, so we will revert to item 6.1 on the agenda, which is actually any other business. Haven't been told of any, but I've actually got an item myself.
Oh. Did you tell yourself about this?
Well, I would have told myself off about it, but when I explain the circumstances, you'll understand. An earlier version of this agenda had FPP on it, which was removed. And I just thought eagle-eyed people might wonder why it was removed. And that was because Paul and I agreed that we wanted a report that we were absolutely confident was complete. And we're not quite there yet, but we will be at the next meeting, and Paul and I will be working on that because I'd like to get to that point as soon as possible. So I just felt, and none of you clearly noticed it in the way that I would, but I thought I'd just get it in. And then the final item is for reflections on the meeting, and Anne very kindly agreed to lead this for me.
I did. I think I was volunteered, as Robert said.
You
asked, and I agreed. So I asked myself as I was thinking about this some questions, and I think the answers to most of them are either yes or probably. So I said, do we spend our time on the right things? Was one question. Have we focused on assurance and constructive change? Have we talked about the right things? And if you were a member of our staff or the public, would there have been anything they'd have expected us to mention that we haven't? Have we lived our values, and have we operated as a unitary board? Were the questions I was trying to answer. So on the time, we clearly loved going on the visits, and we spent a long time on the feedback. We spent a long time on the staff story, and that's clearly where our energy is. And I think in many ways that's right. But I just wondered whether, in the interests of the chair's nerves, whether we should just change the agenda. We either have to do something that says we need to be more succinct, or we change the agenda that says we're going to spend more time on that. Because that was clearly what energised the meeting. Because when I come on to my next point was, did we focus on assurance and on constructive challenge? I think we did. I've said before, I actually quite like the way we start the meeting with the chair's reports, because I think that does set the framework for the meeting. But many of them went through without any challenge at all. And if we're going to operate as a unitary board, we should all own all of the agenda. And I wonder whether we're maybe relying a little too much on the people who happen to be on those committees. So that was a sort of a question mark. If you were a member of the public or a member of our staff, I think what would they have thought? I think they'd have been pleased to see that we triangulated back from the visits, the reference to the emergency department this morning. I think they would have felt that was right. I think the reference to the East Kent report, the winter plan, thinking about the Bristol model, I think they would have all been things that people would have expected us to talk about. The one thing I thought they might have wondered, particularly our staff, is around cost of living. It's a really, really big issue would any of them have thought, actually, we might have mentioned it? Question mark. Did we live our values? I think we did. I think we were polite. It was very interesting that the mood of the music was very energetic to start with. Then I think it got quite flat, and maybe because of the type things that we were talking about. And then it got really energised again when Robert turned up. And I think we were polite. There was clearly some tensions in some of the questions, and I thought maybe it would have been more honest to bottom them out more directly. You know me, I'm a sort of straight bullet between the eyes kind of person, so that is my standard style. So I wasn't sure where that was. Did we operate as a unitary board? I think we did in some things, in the sense that I think we all own the issues that are going on in the hospital. But I think there's some evidence that we stuck to our own areas of expertise. You know, I don't think we were all necessarily thinking about the whole of the board's agenda. They were my thoughts.
Thank you, Anne, and interesting, stimulating, and thought-provoking all at the same time. So thank you very much for that. So, Martin, is that yes?
A couple of quick points. I think on the last point, it would be a really useful thing for us to debate sometime, because my view is a board this size, and under the time pressures we've got, it's very difficult to not stick to your own areas because of the time pressures. The other point is that I think we should look at is, I personally think, and I'm just comparing this with other boards I sit on, we overuse the word assure. If you look at the agenda, other than the minutes, we only have one item to approve. All the other boards I sit in organisations, most of it is approving. And when we talk about flagging and engaging, it would probably help if there was more that we needed to approve. And I think if it was staff, I don't think I'd understand that. I think I'd think that this is the group where it makes decisions, but actually we don't very often make any decisions.
I mean, I think that's completely fair, Martin. I said in relation to George's, because we did have a very important decision to take, not yesterday, but earlier in the week, said it's one of the few decisions boards actually take. So I think there's something there we need to take away. And you know, I say a lot, all that rich debate, and all we've had to do is note it. And actually, we've done more than note it. We've questioned and challenged and understood better. But the formal recommendation says to note. So some stuff to think about there, I think. Peter.
Thank you. Just one point around the energy levels, which I think Anne picked up, and I'm just noting really that for three of us of the NEDs will have sat through 4 hours of meetings yesterday. All the executives, or not all, but a good number of you will have sat through that yesterday. And having them back to back is quite an exhausting process to go through. And I just reflecting on that, and whether or not we ought to, looking forward, perhaps create a little bit more space. I'm not saying that in itself will necessarily fully energise everything, but I think it is quite a challenge to keep up over 8 or 9 hours or whatever it might be over 2 days.
And of course, next year we're going down to 1 day, so that'll be a different challenge, getting it all into 1 day, won't it? Thank you, Peter. James.
If I can just build on the comment you were making, Peter, I think the Epsom St Helier board possibly suffers by routinely following the St George's board, where there's a combination of possible fatigue, but also potentially a sense that there's an overlap, very significant overlap in the members, and we may or may not fall into the temptation of feeling we've already discussed this issue in another forum and don't give due attention. It is too late to do anything about it, but possibly we could occasionally have thought about reversing I know we can't, the dates.
It was down to availability of
No,
board
I
members.
appreciate that.
It doesn't in any way invalidate the point. I think about it a lot, James. Do I have the same levels of energy today as I had yesterday? Life's imperfect, isn't it? But I think all of these points are valid. So Chris, you've indicated, and Jacqueline, and then I think I might call it a day, otherwise we'll end up having we'll overcook it, won't we? So, Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just talking about the ward visits and a couple of things that have come up. I mean, so the non-execs raised some issues which I think are worth looking into. And what I haven't had out of this meeting or previous meetings in similar circumstances, are they just going to be comments by the non-execs or by execs about about the ward visits, which are made and then sort of put to one side, or where do we get the follow-up on those comments?
So that's nice and easy because there is a process, Chris, which Stephen's going to describe.
I'll give a quick overview of it. So we capture all of the issues that come up through this, and we keep a log of it, and we'll play that back to the board next time. What we've done previously, and we're only just resuming the visits, is to have in the pack of papers under that item, to have the kind of the feedback in terms of what's happened. Now, the thing we've got to slightly guard against in that is because an issue gets raised through a board visit, that suddenly jumps the queue in terms of order of priority. So sometimes the response back may be that's part of the capital works programme and it'll work its way through along those lines. So an update will be brought to the next board saying what's come out of these.
Thank you. It's just that they're not forgotten forever, sort of
They're
thing.
not lost in the ether. Thurza. And then, sorry, I wanted to give Jacqueline the last word.
No.
So
I don't mind jumping.
Thurza and then Jacqueline.
It's more of a reflection of, do we actually thank the ward or the department that we've visited, just to acknowledge their time, because I think that would be quite helpful as well.
Well, I certainly do, probably at the gushy end of it, but I don't know about
I've
others.
included a thanks in my weekly messaging. There's a thanks on behalf of the board for everywhere we've been.
Okay. Great. Right, final word, and then we'll end the meeting and do the questions.
So I'm just reflecting on some of the feedback and about what happens in April next year.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether in some of our board development, it's all right as structuring it in one way, but do we need to do a bit of how we're going to behave? I don't mean stop being horrible and shouting at each other, but how actually we construct the board in how we operate it. And do a little bit of work on that together, because we do operate, the boards are a little bit different, just because they are got some different people around there, but how we can help bring that together so the first time we meet together, we've got a way of working that might help us do it in a better way and in April rather than wait till sort of September when we've settled in. Yeah. Does that make sense to you?
It makes complete sense. I think we actually need to do a piece of board, what I'd call proper board development. Facilitated. Whether we're able to squeeze it in or not is another matter, but it feels quite important to me. We've never really, we haven't done anything like that at George's for ages, and I don't think we've ever done it while I've been at ESTH because COVID got in the way. Personally, I think that kind of thing is really important, and so instead of it just being a little bit at the end of the meeting, we can, when we're all feeling a bit tired and waiting for our sandwich anyway, that we well intentionally kind of take away with us, we do it in a more structured way. Stephen and I'll work on whether we can find some time to do that properly. Is that all right? Do you mind? You know how important I think it is.
No, and I completely agree, because I think there's a part of how do we make the group board work in terms of practical dynamics, but there is that broader piece of how do behaviours, etc., and everything. I think we've devoted quite a lot of our board development time, quite rightly, to developing the new strategy, and so we may need to come out to people to find an additional date to have that important discussion.
I know everybody winces, but it's terribly important. I mean, you executive team rightly spend a lot of time on that kind of thing.
We do.
But we're a unitary board. We're two unitary boards, and we've made good progress with our board development, but it is very subject matter based, and we've really done very little about behaviours and how we interact with each other. So an action point to take away. So there you go, Anne. That input encouraged all of that debate. So thank you again. Right, the meeting now has ended. The next meeting will be on Friday the 13th of January. Ooh. There you go. Can't do anything about that. It is Friday the 13th. But we do have some written questions which have been submitted in advance, which I think James is going to deal with. So, James, you'll summarise the question as... Is it? Yeah?
Yes. So, a question came from Logie Lahendran, who is the chair of Merton Seniors Forum and is vice chair of Merton Health Watch and Mental Health Forum as well. And Logie had been involved in a place inspection of St Helier last Monday and wanted to ask a question about how we would be continuing to invest in the current hospital, because he noted various minor works to be carried out, and in particular an issue with the flooding in the corridor between the main block of St Helier and the Queen Mary's Children's Hospital. He wanted to know what we were doing about it. So we are continuing to maintain and invest into the current estates, and we'll be spending over £30 million of capital funding at Epsom and St Helier. We are aware of the poor condition of the Underground Link corridor. And Logie's right, there's significant work required to waterproof the underground tunnel. I've been down there myself in the last week, and it was very damp, with some carpets down to try and provide a little bit of mitigation in terms of a slip risk. But under our capital programme this year, we do have funding set aside to undertake this work. The scheme's out to tender and will be awarded to a contractor, but it will take a few months to get completed. And in the meantime, our excellent estates maintenance team are visiting the area regularly and making sure that we mop up water and maintain safety for patients and staff. And there are two other questions from Logie, which I will hand over to Paul.
Thank you. So one of the questions was, what percentage of staff are permanent employees or agency? Quite difficult to give a precise answer there, but if I just say that around 3,500 shifts per month for agency, and about 4% of our pay budget is taken by agency, that hopefully provides a sense of. And then there was a question around the ethnic demographic of our staff, and so we have about 44% of our staff are from a black and minority ethnic background. 9% are unknown from an ethnicity perspective, and 47% from a white background. Thank you.
So my thanks to both James and Paul for that. And now we have, I'm going to start again at 2, so I'm hoping lunch is out there, is it? Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, everybody. I know it's been a long morning, but it is half an hour less than the agenda said. So that must be an improvement, mustn't it? Thanks, everybody.